CIL 650 presents It's Your Money, an up-close and personal look at your finances. Here's your host, Fred Snyder.
Up in the morning and out to school.
Indeed, we're up. And we're back to school. And we're back.
American history and
Talking about your money and how to keep it. How to keep it is the most important part of that equation. So it's not about how much you make that counts, it's about how much you keep. So how much of your hard-earned dollars have you been able to accumulate? What is your net worth today? Are you doing as well as you'd like to, or would you like to do better? You're not doing so well? What does your financial future look like? Have you taken a look at it lately? Have you acquired a written financial plan that you can look at it and see where you stand from a financial point of view? I don't think so. I think most people fail financially because they're driving around with a bag over their head. They're driving around in a fog. Almost got blinded coming out here today with that sun. That's unbelievable. Driving right into it, I couldn't even see the highway in front of me. Unbelievable. And that always reminds me, that's the way people deal with their money. And joining me today, he's been here a few times, Blair Manton with Sands & Associates. He's an expert when it comes to debt management. I think that would aptly describe what he does. So welcome, Blair.
Oh, thank you very much, Fred. My pleasure to be back again.
So when I talk about financial planning, and I try to define why is it people fail financially the most. And I can come up with all kinds of reasons. But I think one of the fundamental reasons why people fail financially is they don't know how to manage their debt. Or they get into debt and they don't know how to manage it. They don't know the difference between bad debt and good debt. If there's any debt that's good, okay? But, fundamentally, if you're carrying balances on your credit cards and you're paying 20% interest, and that's in after-tax dollars, you're really paying 40%. Because you have to earn enough money, pay tax on it, to have that money left to be able to cover that 20% interest. And that's a recipe for disaster. And it's so easy to do, especially over the Christmas holidays and things like that, buying Christmas presents. No thought to what you should do. And I see financial profiles all the time, and I'm sure that you do too. So what is exactly, Blair, what is it that you do?
Well, so my job, Fred, is I'm a licensed insolvency trustee. And that's a term you probably haven't heard before because, to be honest, the government just changed our name just about 3 or 4 months ago now. So previously, I was called a trustee in bankruptcy, which is a rather scary term. But what it means is I'm empowered by the government to help you get back on your feet. So if you find yourself in too much debt...
You need a fresh start.
Yeah, it's a financial fresh start. It's a second chance at life. It's a really wonderful power that I have because I can take people from literally the worst situation they could ever possibly be in. They feel like they're a horrible person. People are very depressed. Their health is suffering because they've got no idea how they're ever going to pay off these debts that they incurred. And we're all good people. We all want to honor our obligations, but sometimes you just can't. So what I do is I help people when they're in that phase of they just can't pay everything back in full. And it's not always bankruptcy. You know what? For the majority of cases these days, we're not going bankrupt. We're doing repayment plans where we're freezing the interest, we're reducing the debt, and folks are getting back on their feet that way. So it's not all doom and gloom. There's actually a lot of upside.
That's where you specialize, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it not? Yeah. So your firm is called Sands & Associates, and you're a pretty big organization.
Yeah, I'm proud to say it's our 26th year this year, and we're the #1 firm in BC in terms of size for the work that we do. So we're 15 offices around the province, and we're also the #1 firm in terms of service. So every year we win the Consumer Choice Award.
So you got 15 offices in BC. Do you have any offices in any other provinces?
No, we're just BC specific. So everything is pretty old provincially licensed, provincially regulated when it comes to a lot of debt. So we're going to stay within BC, but we've still got a lot of room to grow.
Is there any other firms in Canada that do the same thing?
All the big accounting firms do what we do, but I think what's different about us is this is all that we do. So if you go to one of the big accounting firms, they'll do 150 different things, and they'll also do this, but they're not the experts. For us, this is all that we do. It's individuals, it's small businesses, it's when you find yourself, you can't see the way forward. We'll help you either with a consumer proposal, which I know we're going to go into a little bit later, or if there's nothing else that can be done, we'll help you with a personal bankruptcy.
At what point in time does a person start considering bankruptcy? Like, what are some of the flags?
Right. You know, the number one thing I would say is when you start looking at your credit card statements and you see you're only able to make the minimum payments, and that time frame is just longer than you can contemplate. So what I mean is if you look down at the bottom of your credit card statements, it'll tell you if you only make the minimum payments, it's going to take you 50 years or 100 years or 20 years. It's when you start looking at that and you know that you can't increase your payments beyond what you're already doing, you're on the never never plan at that point, and you really should be talking to somebody about how you can turn things around. You know, some of the more traditional warning signs that you'll see is, are you receiving collection calls? You know, are you getting calls at home? Are you getting calls at work? Are you missing payments? You know, one really early warning sign is, are you using credit to pay credit? So are you taking from one card to pay another?
Kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, you know, just moving money around, and you can do
like
that for
years.
Like a
Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, Ponzi scheme for yourself, right?
Fighting.
Yeah. Yeah, there's never a happy ending, but you know, for some people, that'll help them avoid the next collection call is just by taking the cash advance on one card and paying it to the other. And I can understand the behavior, but there's no grand happy ending, as I said, is it's always going to end badly because eventually all the cards are going to get maxed out. And what kind of frustrates me a little bit of my job is I know the earlier people come to see me, the more options I can help them with, the less severe things have to be. It's a lot easier to solve $20,000 of debt than it is to solve $80,000 of debt. It's still possible, but it's more difficult. So if folks can take intervention more early, you know, they can turn it around that much quicker.
Okay, so a person gets into financial difficulties. A person becomes overwhelmed. They just don't know what to do. They're considering bankruptcy. They want a fresh start somehow. They just don't know what to do. So they call you.
Yeah.
Okay. So you end up attempting to convince them that a consumer proposal would be the way to go.
So I wouldn't say it that way. So my job, Fred, is I'm an independent officer of the court. So it's kind of the last thing that I can be seen to do is convincing anybody of anything. Okay. My job is you know, to give them access to a remedy.
You don't sell them one way or the other.
No, absolutely not.
You clearly explain the options and let them make the decision.
Yeah, the way I say it is I'm like a referee in the middle. So my job is to help you understand all of the rules, and if you want to play by those rules, well, here's the remedy that's to you. Now, in practice, you know, I'm spending a lot of time educating folks on basic concepts of credit, of budgeting, of debt. Part of what you have to do if you do a consumer proposal or a bankruptcy is you have to come for 2 really in-depth credit counseling sessions. So we really care. We want to help you turn things around. But strictly speaking, it's got to come from you. You got to have the desire inside of you to really want to take responsibility, face things head on, and move forward, because you're not running away. You know, running away is just, hey, I'm never going to pay these guys and good luck finding me. You know, if you're filing a bankruptcy or you're doing a proposal, you're facing this head on. You're saying, guys, here's my life, here's what I can do, and I want a second chance.
So what does, like, somebody comes in and let's suppose they have $100,000, we'll say, in debts.
Yep.
And they can't make the payments. And for various reasons, maybe they lost their job, maybe there's a sickness involved, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, those are both very big reasons. Yeah.
Even a divorce.
Yep. That's the third one. You hit the big 3. Yep.
So somebody comes to you and they say, okay, I can't cover my debt load, help. So let's pretend you're talking to me. So what would you say to me?
Well, you know, the first thing I would tell you is, you know, let's take a deep breath. You know, at the end of the day, there's a solution for everything here. And, you know, again, I have folks who are incredibly depressed and, you know, their physicality is hurting and all that stuff. At the end of the day, I want folks to know there is hope. You know, no matter how bad it is, you can turn it around. So the first thing we're going to do when we sit down with a consultation is I'm just going to ask you a bunch of questions. I'm going to say, well, what's the debt? Who do you owe and how much? Because the types of debt do matter. Now, there's almost no debt that I can't help with. You know, there's a very small list, and a lot of them are logical. Can't help you reduce child support or alimony because no one should be able to help you reduce that. You know, I can't help you if a court has given you fines against yourself. So, Fred, if you ran a Ponzi scheme and they fined you $100,000, I can't help you reduce that. But obviously, you didn't do that, and the person in the example didn't do that either. So if it's standard credit card debt or it's income tax debt or if it's student loans, as long as they haven't just come out of school and want to try to reduce the debt.
You can deal with income tax as well?
I can absolutely deal with income tax, yeah. Yeah, so a lot of my practice is, and it's not a fortunate thing, but it's unfortunate that folks become self-employed, and you know, there's no requirement when you become self-employed to take all the courses to tell you how to file your taxes and your GST and so on and so forth. So you know, part of it is on the individual that they don't always, you know, really understand what they're doing when they're self-employed, but it's not uncommon to find, you know, a lot of very small contractors who have very big GST debts or very big income tax debts. We can help with that.
Interesting. So basically people get into debt because they spend more than they earn. They're broke on payday. And then they go out and they want to buy something and they don't have any money, so they borrow the money to buy it. They put it on a credit card. They take a bank loan, line of credit, whatever. So when you spend more than you earn, you have to finance the deficit.
Yeah.
And that holds true for governments and municipalities and provincial governments and even individuals or businesses.
It's one of those inescapable
Yeah.
natural laws.
You can't
right?
spend more than you earn.
Mhm.
It's impossible. At least to do it on a long-term basis.
Yeah.
And so, number one thing to do is make sure you have a budget.
Yeah, that's where we start, Fred. So in that meeting we were
Yeah.
talking about, so first thing I'm going to ask about is your debt. So what's
Yeah.
the size of the problem we're dealing with?
Yeah.
Second thing I'm going to ask about, well, what's our ability to solve the problem? You know, if you're a
Mhm.
single person, you're earning $1,000 a month. Well, let's forget about making any payments on your debt. You got to figure
Yeah.
out how you're going to live, feed yourself, and you know, find shelter
Sure.
based on that. But you know, once we understand the budget and where is the money going, because it's amazing. And you know, I don't say that I'm a saint here either, but it's amazing how much of your money goes out the door that you don't know where it's
Oh, it's
going.
amazing how it can slip through the cracks.
Yeah, exactly.
No question. Me, you, everybody.
Yeah.
So you got to have discipline.
Yeah, you know, there's some apps that are out there that'll track where your spending
Yeah.
is, but it really comes down to you don't need more than, you know, a small notebook and a pen and the discipline to write down everything that you spend, because that's the first thing. If you're going to solve a debt problem, you got to stop borrowing first. And many people, they don't even know they're borrowing each month because they haven't looked at their budget to see, well, every month there's $200-300 that is going out that didn't come in the first place.
Well, I had a client complain about their debt load last week that was in to see me. And I said, well, let's do a budget. Take 10 minutes right there. So I quickly do a budget. This lady was spending or had a deficit of about $600 a month.
Right.
Spending $600 a month more than what was coming. And she didn't even know.
Yeah.
So I said to her, I said, where does the $600 a month come from? The shortfall. Oh, I guess I put it on my credit cards. I guess I put it on my line of credit. That's what happens.
Right.
And if you can't borrow the money and you got the deficit, and you're lucky enough or fortunate enough to have some assets, you can sell some assets to cover the deficit too.
Yeah.
But either way, your net worth diminishes because the assets either decline or the liabilities increase.
Yeah, and Fred, you're hitting on an example that I see again and again, and you know, it's somewhat heartbreaking because, you know, anybody in the last 20, 30 years that bought a house in the Lower Mainland really, by all rights, should be financially secure. You know, whatever they paid, the house has went up so far beyond that there's no reason why they shouldn't have a lot of equity there.
Yes.
But I see a lot of folks where the house might be even in seven figures, you know, over $1 million. They've got almost no equity because they've just continuously overspent each month, and every few years they pull out a new home equity line, and then they draw that down, and pull out another one every few years. So you really can compromise your entire financial future just with the day-to-day consumptive spending that gives you nothing in the long term. You know,
And
you
they're
don't
fine.
remember that.
They're fine until the bubble bursts.
Yeah.
And the cash calls start coming in.
Yeah.
Okay. All of a sudden they're underwater. The house is worth less than the financing. That's a problem.
Oh,
That
yeah.
happened in the States
Mm-hmm.
back in 2008. And there's talk we may be heading into another similar situation right now.
Well, and to me, Fred, that's scary because in the States, the laws are somewhat different in that if you are underwater on your house and you have to return the house to the bank, you know, you hear the stories of throw the keys back to the bank or whatnot, and that's the end of it. In many places of the States, almost everywhere, that is the end of it. They can't come back to you and say, well, we sold it and we lost $100,000, therefore you, homeowner, owe us this money. In Canada, absolutely they can do that. If you owe more than what your mortgage is and the house sells for less than what is owing on the mortgage, you're on the hook for that deficit. And I have people coming in, you know, now it's a trickle, it's not that many folks, but, you know, you can see if interest rates move the wrong way or values move the wrong way, you know, potentially there'll be a lot of folks with negative equity where you have to deal with it. You can't just walk away.
So we look at my situation, we'll say, and we have this $100,000 of unmanageable debt. I can't make the payments, et cetera, et cetera. So what are you going to propose to me?
Well, so we still need a little bit more information. So
Okay.
first off, I've got to know what are your assets. So, you know, for most people that come in to me, they've got pretty minimal assets. You know, let's say you got a house, but you've probably got a mortgage that's eating up
Oh.
almost all of the equity.
I got a house, there's no equity.
Right. Yeah, so in that case...
I mean, I'm being hypothetical.
Oh, yeah. Well, I hope so, Fred, yeah. So at that case, I'm only concerned in assets that have any value, and obviously a house with no equity, if I sell it, I'm just paying out the bank, and that's it. Sure. And, a lot of people think if you go into bankruptcy, you automatically lose your house. It's quite the opposite. Most people are in a better position to keep their house, because as long as they can continue to make the mortgage payments, and they're allowed some equity, each person on title is allowed up to $12,000 of equity, so it's not the case you have a bit of equity, the house has got to get sold. You got to have some significant amount.
Hopefully we have some listeners out there right now that are taking notes.
I hope so.
Would you repeat that for their benefit?
Oh, of course. Yeah. So if you file for bankruptcy, there's a number of assets you're allowed to keep. One of them is house equity, and it's up to $12,000. So don't assume that just because you go into bankruptcy, you will lose your house or have to be sold. Depending on the amounts of equity that you have, most likely you're going to keep the house, and you'll be in a better position to pay the mortgage because you're not having to deal with, the whatever $100,000 of credit card debt, whatever it was, that's taking your ability to pay the mortgage because you got to service that instead.
What other assets can I keep?
So great question. So household furniture, a lot of folks come into me, they're concerned, am I going to come to their house, take everything out, and make it be very embarrassing. The government says if someone goes through bankruptcy, it's meant to get you back on your feet, not to really beat you down. So you're going to keep all of your household furniture, assuming you don't have, a Van Gogh on the wall or a big grand piano or something. You're going to keep your tools of the trade. So if you're a tradesperson, a musician, whatnot, you need that to earn income. It would be fundamentally at odds with what we're trying to do here if someone's going to take all of your tools. So you're going to keep your tools of the trade. You're going to keep a vehicle. The government says, okay, if you need to get to work, well, you're going to need a vehicle, and regardless of that, a vehicle is somewhat of a necessity of everyday life. Now, you're not allowed, the Maserati or whatnot.
I can't have a Mercedes-Benz or a Italian sports car, none of that kind of stuff.
No, it all comes down to what's your equity. You're allowed a vehicle up to $5,000 of equity. So if there's no loan, it's worth less than $5,000, it's free and clear. If there's a loan, what's the value, less the value of the loan. So you're allowed that. One really important one, Fred, and I think I go through this on every show, and I'll do this, until folks stop, unfortunately, making this mistake, is RRSPs.
Yes.
So I think you're very clear on this. RRSPs are a protected asset. You do not lose your retirement if you have to file for bankruptcy. However, there's nothing to save you from yourself. If you choose to cash in your RRSPs because you're trying to do the right thing, which, God bless them, people are trying to do the right thing by cashing in their retirement to pay their debts. Usually it doesn't solve the problem. Usually it does not enough to pay off the debts. Usually they've got a big tax bill they didn't plan for afterwards. And then by the time they've dealt with everything, they're completely in a different position than if they had kept that retirement, dealt with the issue, and then, they can still retire okay versus cash it all in and then have a precarious look in the future.
Okay. So you're going to suggest to me, or I would assume, that I do a proposal.
Yeah, so
I'm not going to go bankrupt.
Right.
Unless I choose to. But you're going to persuade me that a proposal is a better way to go.
Yeah, what I'm going to do...
What are the pros and cons of a proposal versus bankruptcy?
Right. So I think you've said it well, Fred. So bankruptcy is always the last resort. So what we're going to do is we're going to look for what's any possible way that we can not go bankrupt here. If there's any way we can find it, it's usually that's what we're going to try to do. The number one way is a proposal. And just for benefits of the listeners who maybe haven't heard earlier segments, consumer proposal is where you freeze all the interest on the debt. So say it's the $100,000 we're talking about. So that stops being $100,000.
I don't have to pay interest anymore.
No. So not the plus 20%, it's plus 0%. So by law, everything is frozen. And then a proposal allows you to reduce the debt to what you can afford to pay off. So usually it's
every payment I make is 100% against the principal.
Against the principal, but it's not against the $100,000 principal, and that's really important. Only a trustee can reduce the principal, so usually it's down to about 30%. So your $100,000, if you file a proposal and once it's accepted, which almost every proposal is accepted, it could be down to $30,000. The way a proposal works is you have up to 5 years to make all of those payments. So the numbers work nicely here. If it's 60 months over $30,000, you'd be paying $500 per month. Where you can imagine the minimum payments on $100,000 of credit card debt, you'd probably be $2,000 or $3,000 a month.
Easy.
And you're not getting ahead at that point. No. You're on the 50 or 100-year plan to pay it off.
Never plan, yeah.
Right. So in terms of the benefits of the proposal, well, number one, it's a payment you can afford. So if you're finding yourself, you're opening the mail, or you've even stopped opening the mail because it's just bad news. Here's a payment that you can afford. You can get it within your budget. We haven't talked about what you're earning each month, Fred, but I'm going to assume that if you were able to rack up $100,000 in debt and service that for a period of time, probably you're able to cover a proposal payment, for a third of that debt. But we got to make sure the budget works.
What happens if you miss a payment?
Well, so if you miss one payment, it's not the end of the world, but it is a proposal, something that you've got to take seriously. So you're allowed to miss up to 3 payments. And if you catch each one up each time, that doesn't count. So it's 3 cumulative. So if you've went 3 months without making payments, you get a final 30 days to bring this up to date. If that doesn't happen, the proposal fails. You're back to where you started. The debts go back to what they were. So that's a bad situation. That usually only happens, if someone, say, lost their job or become ill. And if we know about that in advance, we can file an amendment to the proposal. We can say, for the next 6 months, the payments are going to be, very nominal because there's not the income, but we know the income's coming back. So as long as you stay on top of it, it's fine. But if you go silent for 3 or 4 months, yeah, the proposal can fail.
So we'll say in a period of, we'll say the first couple of years or so, let's say I miss 3 payments in the first, and they're not consecutive.
Did you catch them up?
No. That's
okay. Then you're sitting on the edge, and you've got 30 days to bring it back.
I got 30 days to catch them up.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's meant to get.
Fair is fair.
Yeah. By the time you get to doing a proposal, probably you've missed a bunch of payments, and maybe you haven't taken a couple of things serious, and maybe you have, not putting everyone into that same bucket. But the way a proposal is, it's meant to be, here's a great deal, here's no interest, here's a reduction in the principal, but you, individual, getting this deal, you got to take it serious. You got to make the payments every single month. You got to come for the 2 counseling sessions. You have to make sure you organize your budget so that this, gets paid first, and any of the other stuff that you've had to adjust out of your budget, that doesn't creep back in to compromise your ability.
What is the success rate? I imagine it's pretty high.
Almost every case, Fred. I'm so proud to say that.
Yeah.
So every month we're filing over 100 consumer proposals. It's well over 95 of those get accepted. So it's almost every case. And the reason for that is we were talking earlier about the benefit. So the benefit to the individual is it's not a bankruptcy. They don't have that stigma. They can feel much better about themselves, and their credit is better off. The benefit to the people receiving the proposal, people that are owed money, first off, obviously they're not thrilled. They'd rather get their full $100,000 back. But when I file a consumer proposal, I'm going to show them if they reject this proposal, the person is probably going to file for bankruptcy, where they're going to do far worse than 30%. Many bankruptcies are 0% recovery or 5 or 10%. So the benefit to the creditors is that they're going to receive a proposal of, roughly a third of the debt versus, probably close to 0 if they weren't willing to work with the individual and the individual had to file a bankruptcy.
Is 30% an average, or like generally? Or?
It's a pretty good starting point. So it's it's rare to see a proposal that's, below 20 cents on the dollar that gets accepted, but sometimes it's possible, if it's a lump sum proposal.
What about 50% or a higher number?
Well, it's sometimes it does have to be higher because it's all depending on, what would happen if the person filed for bankruptcy. And I've got, many doctors, lawyers, very high net worth individuals who sometimes have to file a bankruptcy. If they file a bankruptcy with $100,000 of debt, that debt's not going to get paid back at 0% because this person makes a good amount of money.
Yeah.
So, for that doctor, for example, the proposal might have to be for 70 or 80 cents on the dollar, but still it's going to be no interest. So the debts are going to stop moving away from him, and it's going to be a better deal than he could have done, any other way, short of, trying to negotiate and pay it himself, which is always job one. So what I'm talking about here is, not this great strategy. If you're sitting here and you've got a big net worth and you can freeze all the interest and pay off only a part of the debt, that's not for you. This is if you've tried everything else, you don't have the ability to pay the debt in full. Here is how a proposal can work.
What does it do to your credit rating?
Well, so anytime you don't pay the debts in full, the credit's going to take a hit. Now, the thing I try to counsel people towards is you've really got to do, 2 parallel scenarios in your mind. What's my credit rating going to look like if I really hunker down and pay this thing off over the next 10 or 20 years, which is what it might take? Your credit's going to be good. Or what's it going to take if you take a very short-term hit on your credit, get back to 0, and then rebuild, and you're able to save money? Usually you're better off.
What does short-term mean?
Well, I'm going to tell you. So if you file a consumer proposal, 2 years after you finish the proposal is when it drops off your credit. So if it's a 5-year proposal...
Oh, that's fantastic.
Oh, yeah, it's really not that bad. So it's a 5-year proposal. 2 years after that, it's going to be clear. Now, with a proposal, you can also pay it off early. So just because it's for 5 years, if you're able to make extra payments, get it done in 2 years, 2 years to pay off the proposal plus 2 years of credit impact, it's not that huge. Even a bankruptcy, most bankruptcies are over within 9 months if somebody's low income, or within a year and 9 months, so 21 months if somebody's not low income. The credit rating impact for a bankruptcy is 6 years after. So that's why some people think bankruptcy takes 7 years.
I always thought it was 7 myself.
Yeah, but most people think you're going to be in bankruptcy for 7 years. Absolutely not. You're going to be out in either 9 or 21 months.
You just don't have a credit rating for 7
well,
6 years.
What it's going to show, and this is great, Fred, I'm really glad we're getting to the bottom of this, is for 6 years after your bankruptcy, it's going to show you filed for bankruptcy. But most people I see 2 or 3 years after bankruptcy, even though when creditors are pulling that report, they see there's been a bankruptcy, they're still advancing them credit, even to the extent of mortgages and car loans. And the reasons at first weren't clear to me, but they're very logical. If someone files for bankruptcy, immediately after they emerge, they've got no debt. Before somebody files for bankruptcy, they've got a ton of debt. Who's a better credit risk? Someone who owes a ton of money or somebody who owes nothing? When somebody's just emerged from bankruptcy, they've just come through this very serious legislative legal proceeding that they took very seriously. You know who's going to take very seriously the next person that loans them money? Someone who's just emerged from bankruptcy. They don't want to do that again. They've learned their lesson. So right away from a bankruptcy or a proposal, people aren't going to give you credit, but within 2 or 3 years, if you rebuild your credit the right way, and I think we're going to go into that maybe a little bit later, it's possible to qualify for mortgages, get car loans, and really have a much better situation than if you had hunkered down for 20 years or whatever it would have taken you to pay this off just to preserve a perfect credit rating. Usually that's the wrong decision, is to be guided by a perfect credit rating.
Well, if you get yourself into a situation where you're overwhelmed by debt, and you try to hunker down and clear it up, it might not be a good thing to do.
No, I
because
think
you just you sink in worse. It's like quicksand.
Oh yeah, in many ways that's the wrong thing to do, but in many ways that's the default. It's the easy thing. The easy thing is just to let the minimum payments get made and pull it from one card to the other, and really not have, the more difficult conversation. People are scared to death when they phone me up or they come in and sit down, because they think my job is to judge them, to make them feel bad. Everyone else has already done that by the time they get to me. But what I find is people just don't have any information. So I think there's no other alternative, and definitely a collection agent is not going to tell you, hey, you have an alternative than to doing this for the rest of your life. You've got to go out and get your own information yourself, and then make an informed decision.
Is consumer proposals well known by the public at large these days?
It's getting more and more well known. This is why we're doing these shows. Is for me, trustees historically haven't done a great job of telling everybody what we do and what the benefits are. So previous to 2009, it was pretty rare for somebody to do a consumer proposal. We were probably 80% bankruptcies for the clients that we see. Since then, it's been every year increasing to the point where we're a majority of clients we see are doing consumer proposals, just because they're more aware of them, they understand the benefits, they're coming to see us earlier as well. So rather than letting it get to 100 where they've got to pay back 30, stopping it at 50 where they can maybe pay back 15, that's a lot more reasonable. $250 a month compared to $500 in these examples. So people are learning more about it. The government's really encouraging it, because also in 2009 the government changed the laws of bankruptcy to make it longer and more expensive to go through a bankruptcy if you're not low income, because they want people to do proposals instead. If somebody's low income and they're earning $1,000 a month, they said they got bigger fish to fry, and doing a proposal is not in their best interest. But if it's the doctor, the lawyer, the professional, someone earning even $3,000 a month or $2,500 a month, it can make a whole lot of sense for them to look at a proposal and not go bankrupt.
I'm in the business of teaching people about wealth creation, and you're in the business. Well, let's segue what we're talking about into the process of wealth creation. How does that segue in? How do they kind of fit together?
It's pretty hard to create wealth when the wolf's at the door, right?
Yeah.
When the collection agents are calling you every day and night. And what I tell folks too, when they're really focused on their credit rating, is let's say you got perfect credit now, and why do you want that credit rating? It's almost everybody wants it because they want to get a mortgage. If you've got a bunch of debt, you saving for that down payment is a bit of a fool's errand, because unless you pay that debt, they're going to sue you and they're going to take it anyway.
Yeah.
So, your goal might be to get that mortgage, and you think the means there is perfect credit, but unless you deal with that debt, you're never going to get there.
Well, let's talk about credit score. There's credit reporting agencies, and you have a credit score. What's all that mean?
Yeah, there's huge amounts of misconceptions, misunderstandings about it, and even myself, I learn a ton all the time about this. So essentially, your credit report, everyone understands this. It's a record of your financial life. So everything that you do, it's noted in this credit report. So most of us have this idea, like, okay, there is a credit report. It's a record of my financial life, and it's out there. So where it is out there is there's 2 credit bureau agencies in Canada. There's Equifax and there's TransUnion that are widely known. Now, most people don't know this. You have the right to get your credit report at any point at no charge to you.
Where does Experian fit in? Is that not one too?
They might be the third one. I don't deal with them very much.
Okay,
So from the
fine.
consumer point of view,
Yeah,
it's Equifax and it's TransUnion.
Okay.
You have the right to get your credit report from either of those at any point. Now, if you go
Yeah.
online, they're going to charge you $25 or $30 to get it instantly. But if you can handle waiting a couple weeks for the mail, you can send them off a request. It's on my website. If you go to sands-trustee.com and you click on downloads, there's a credit investigation request form. Send it off. The reason I say people should do that, and any listeners, if you're not doing much this morning, go and do that, is you will be amazed at the amount of inaccuracies, wrong information, outdated information that's on your credit report. 30 million people in Canada, or 33 million, a bunch of transactions every single day. I can see that it can get complex very quickly, but I couldn't believe how inaccurate mine was, with my name wrong and accounts wrong.
I had similar experience.
Yep.
I got turned down for a credit one time and I couldn't figure out why.
Right.
I went down and there was something on there that was incorrect.
Exactly.
And it was hard to get it off.
Yeah, you've got to open an investigation request on each of the items. It's possible, and they've got to deal with it, but it's probably not their top priority is, helping people correct their credit, but either way, it's got to get done. So it's very important that you check your credit, you monitor it. What happens, most people, they understand there's a credit rating, and in your credit rating is every debt you have is rated from R1, which R1 is perfect, you've never missed a payment, you're the best consumer ever, to R9, the debt's been written off in a bankruptcy.
You're a deadbeat.
Yeah, or you're a deadbeat, which is what they think of skip tracing or whatever, you've left the country. So every debt you have is going to report from R1 to R9, and then most people understand there's also a credit score. There's some number, 800 is great and 500 is bad, and that's numbers, basically, that changes all the time.
That takes debt service ratio.
That takes a lot of things into consideration. So it takes,
account.
how much of your credit are you utilizing? If you got a $10,000 limit, are you at $9,900 all the time, or are you at $4,000?
Well, that number depends upon what it costs you to service the debt that you owe compared to your gross income.
Yeah, it's
There's
trying
gross,
to risk check for the
there's
bank.
gross and net. There's two different numbers. So, but it's how you pay is only part of it. You may have perfect credit score and not qualify because your rating is down because your debt service ratio is out of whack.
Oh, you're right. There's a bunch of things that are totally counterintuitive. Let me give you a couple. Number one is most people think a mortgage helps their credit. It doesn't. Every time you pay your mortgage, it doesn't put a positive story on your credit. It only puts a negative story if you don't pay. So if all you're doing is paying your mortgage and thinking that's preserving your credit, you better have some other accounts that are also doing that.
So you miss a payment, you got a problem.
Oh yeah, it's going to be a negative hit. Yep.
Larry, we have to go to the break.
Of course.
We're going to go to the break, and when we come back, we'll continue this very, very exciting topic about debt management. Don't go away. Because the name of the game is to create cash flow.
Fred Snyder.
So just visualize yourself. If you want to go to Hawaii every year, you're lying on the beach, you can feel the hot sun beating down on your back. You get up, you take a walk, you can feel the hot sand crunch between your toes, you hear the waves lapping on the beach, the seagulls circling overhead. You got to be able to visualize all this. And this is not just for you, this is for anybody else that's out there listening to the show. You have to motivate yourself. And the way you motivate yourself is being able to visualize yourself enjoying your objectives, as I just did.
And that's why I'm calling you.
Okay?
Fred Snyder.
That's the key. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how you can afford to pursue and enjoy your hopes, your plans, your dreams, and your ambitions. That's what we're talking about.
Fred Snyder.
If you have a financial plan and you're somewhere in the middle and you're wondering what tweaks that you should make in that plan to make it what you really want it to be, time to make a phone call. Or if maybe you're just getting started out and you want to get a starter plan, maybe it's time to talk to somebody like myself and get yourself on the right track.
Call Fred. Listen to Fred. Fred Snyder. Sunday mornings 9 to 11 on CIL 650. This is CISL Vancouver. Smooth and easy.
CIL 650.
This is It's Your Money on CIL 650. Here once again is Fred Snyder.
Okay, we're back. I'm personal certified financial planner Fred Snyder, also a registered financial planner representing Scotia Wealth Management. I'm here with Blair Manton, who deals with debt, and he works for a company that is called Sands and Company, 15 branches.
Yeah, Sands and Associates. Yep.
In BC. And you specialize in helping people get a fresh start. People who get overwhelmed by their debt. They go out at Christmas time, they rack their credit cards sky high. They don't have a budget. The debt overwhelms them. They just can't make the payments anymore.
Yeah. Christmas is never the only thing that sends them through the door, but Christmas might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. So, this time of year is actually the busiest time of all for us because it's right around now. The Christmas credit card bills are coming and people are taking a hard look at, how bad is the situation. Even if the Christmas wasn't the main thing, there's probably a situation before then that's been contributing.
So you might call yourself a credit counselor.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. That would be your job description.
Yeah,
perhaps.
I usually describe myself as a credit counselor and a trustee. So for many people that I see, almost a majority, they don't need to do a formal filing. They don't need to do a bankruptcy or a proposal. They just need some information. They need some help. They need some coaching. They need somebody to give them the facts about, well, what is the reality around debt and credit and remedies? Because there really isn't an easy way to find all that in one place outside of a trustee.
So when you find yourself in a situation like that, you really have three options. Option number one, you don't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
You just keep trying.
Mm-hmm.
That gets worse and worse usually. Second option is a consumer proposal. The third option is bankruptcy. Okay, so let's talk a bit about bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
Scary word.
Yeah.
What's it mean?
Well, so bankruptcy, it's got a lot of negative connotations because most people have a sense in their mind of what it's going to be like, where the reality is completely at odds. So, right off the top, people think if they go bankrupt, they're making a public admission of moral failure. Everyone's going to know, their employer's going to know, their kids are going to know, their neighbors are going to know, all of that. That's all completely false. It's very rare that any bankruptcy has to be in the newspaper. We do thousands of cases every year. Personally, I've had one in the last 2 years that I've had to put a one-day notice in the newspaper about, and that's only because the person had a ton of assets. Most people don't.
Wasn't there a time that you had to do that?
Yeah.
though?
Oh, yeah.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, so mid 80s or early 80s or so, yeah, every bankruptcy had to be in there. And being frank with you, Fred, if we had to put every bankruptcy in the newspaper, there would be newspapers that were comprised of nothing else but bankruptcy notifications. Okay, there are 5,000 people a month in this country that go into bankruptcy.
In this country, that means BC or Canada?
In Canada, so
In
it's about
Canada.
1,000 people a month in BC do either a bankruptcy or a
A
proposal.
month.
Yep.
That's a lot.
Oh yeah, it's roughly 10% of the population at some point in their life is going to have to restructure their debt. So probably if folks are listening, someone in your life has had to do this and you've had no idea about it. And really that's the way that it should be. It's no one else's business. If you're having a problem dealing with your commercial obligations, it's between you and your creditors, and that's how a bankruptcy works. The creditors are notified. Obviously I know about it. I'm a trustee. My regulator knows about it. But it's very difficult for anybody who's not a party to the proceedings to find out anything's even happened. So for most people, bankruptcy, it's a very private process. Second off, people think they're going to lose everything. They think the trustee is going to visit their house, going to start carting out possessions. If they have RRSPs, they're gone. If they've got a house, that's gone. If they got
Would
a
I
car,
be able
that's
to keep
gone.
my boat?
Well, it depends. So it depends on what the boat's worth.
Yeah.
But for the most part, if someone's got a boat and they got more debt than they're able to pay, the first answer is, well, I'm sorry, you got to sell the boat and pay the debt, and then come back and see me. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, mind you, if you're living on the boat, and that's why I said, everything there's a bunch of options for. If you're living on the boat and that's your principal residence, we talked earlier that home equity is exempt up to $12,000. So if your boat's worth less than $12,000, yeah, it probably can't be seized from you. But I think we're getting into the arcane there.
So no boat.
Probably no boat, but you do keep. Yeah, I told you, you keep a vehicle, you keep household goods, you keep your tools of the trade, you keep your clothing and any medical aids that you might have. Just about everybody that I see keeps all of their assets after a bankruptcy.
I imagine that you have to qualify. You just can't have a bunch of debt and go and say, I'm going to go bankrupt to avoid the debt.
No, that's right. Yeah, so
Okay,
that's...
So
yep.
what are the qualifications? What does your financial situation look like to be able to declare bankruptcy?
So the bar in terms of what's in law is very low. So that's, the theoretical bar is you have to owe more than $1,000 and you have to not be able to pay it. Okay. Do I have anybody going bankrupt at $1,000, $1,500? Absolutely not. The lowest we'll see is $8,000 or $10,000, and that's a law that came from the Great Depression, where $1,000 was still a lot of money. The big test is, are you insolvent? And insolvent means, are you able to pay your debts if you were to sell your assets? So if you've got a house with $1 million of equity and you got $50,000 of debt, you're very clearly solvent, or not insolvent, meaning that you can sell those assets to pay your debts. It's if you've got no assets and you've got way too much debt, you would meet the test of being insolvent. And as long as you're more than $1,000 insolvent, no one can reject you from filing for bankruptcy. You don't need to get permission. It's not the case your creditors can say, no, we want to be paid. It's your right to get legal protection from your creditors. Now, going into bankruptcy is very much not a free ride. There's a number of things that you have to do, and it's a very serious legal process, so people don't take it lightly. But yeah, the requirements in law are relatively low.
Okay, so if I find myself in a situation where my net worth, let's say my net worth is negative, does that mean I can declare bankruptcy if I have a negative net worth?
Well, it depends
based on what you just said.
Well, it depends on what's your monthly income also. So your net worth might be negative, but you might be a doctor that's earning huge amounts of money per month. If you're making, say, for example, $10,000 a month and you owe $20,000, yeah, you could theoretically file for bankruptcy, but you would be insane to do so, because what you would have to pay in the bankruptcy over the space of a couple of months, you'd have paid the debt back in full. So for everybody that we meet with, we go through and we do all of these calculations. So in most cases, when we sit down and run the numbers for a bankruptcy, it comes down to a person's personal preference. You know, are they okay with the idea of a bankruptcy, and do they think that's going to get them back to where they need to be, in an appropriate amount of time, or are they more likely to file a consumer proposal because they're going to feel better about it? They're going to feel better that they're making a repayment option. They're not going into bankruptcy. Their credit's going to be hit less severely. It's only 2 years as opposed to 6 years after. So a lot of it comes down to personal preference, but the test of being eligible for a bankruptcy or a proposal is the same. You have to be insolvent, which means you're not able to pay your debts, and if you sold your assets, it wouldn't be enough to pay your debts.
And what are your qualifications?
So my qualifications...
To do what you do, what do you have to do?
So there's a pretty eclectic group, I would say, of trustees across Canada. So just about every trustee has a university degree, and I'm no different. So I've got a Bachelor of Business Administration from the Schulich School of Business at York University. After that, I started working for a big accounting firm, Deloitte & Touche, and that's where I started to study to be a trustee. So trustee education, it's on the job. You have to work with a trustee firm, and then after a number of years of experience, you embark on the qualification program. When I went through that, that was about 4 years of twice-a-year exams, and at the end you have to sit a long 2-day comprehensive exam and attend an oral exam with the superintendent of bankruptcy, with a judge, with a lawyer, really trying to make sure that the power that a trustee is given it's quite remarkable. I've got the ability to give people relief from their debts, so the government wants to make sure any one of the 1,000 people they license in Canada, and it is only 1,000, that they're not going to bring the system into disrepute. They're going to be fair, impartial, essentially referees in the whole system.
So there's a code of ethics.
Oh, absolutely. There's a code of ethics. There's standards of professional practice. My regulator is the superintendent of bankruptcy. They oversee me and every trustee in Canada. It's a very highly regulated field, just given the issues that are at play. In general, and this is kind of the unfortunate part of my job, is sometimes people aren't happy, and usually it's the folks that aren't getting paid, which is the creditors. So a trustee has to really be seen as above reproach, seen as somebody that's impartial, in the middle, just helping that the pain be shared equally. The pain of that person not paying be shared equally amongst the creditors, and not be unduly put on the individual's shoulder.
So when I or someone else comes to see you because I'm overwhelmed by my debt load, you decide to take me on as a client, and we're either talking about a consumer proposal or bankruptcy. How much does a consumer proposal cost?
So these are all great questions, because everything that we do is set by government tariff. So it's the same with every trustee that you have. So you don't need to go and see 5 or 6 different trustees. You pick the trustee that you think you have a good personal rapport with or personal relationship, because it's going to be the same everywhere else. So if someone's going to file a consumer proposal, let's go back to your $100,000 of debt example. So the person's got $100,000 of debt. We're able to reduce it down to $30,000, and they're going to make monthly payments of $500 per month. Okay, so eventually you're going to pay back $30,000. We get paid out of that payment. So there's never anything separate that the individual is charged.
So the payment that I have to make, or someone else, doesn't matter who. Yeah. But that payment, you're paid out of that.
Exactly. So
is that a percentage of the payment?
Yep. Yeah, so we determine collectively what you're able to pay back, and then out of that payment, the trustee retains a portion. It's roughly 20% of what you pay back. So if you're paying back $500, the creditors are getting about $400 or $425, whatever that works out to, $400 of that, and I'm getting about $100 of that as the trustee. So on a smaller proposal, it's much lower. On a higher proposal, it's much higher, but all set by government tariff. And from the individual's point of view, it's not costing them anything extra. I think what's really important here, Fred, too, is a lot of people think they've got to pay a bunch of upfront fees to start dealing with their debt, to start a consumer proposal. Absolutely not. If you do a consumer proposal, you make that first payment, say it's $500 or it's $200 or it's $150, whatever.
No cash required.
That's all you pay, and then we send it out for voting, and you don't have to pay anything else.
This is good. This is good stuff.
Yeah, I wish more people knew about it. Almost everyone I see, they wish they'd seen me sooner. They wish someone had told them this stuff sooner.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, listeners out there, if you just tuned in, I'm certified financial planner Fred Snyder, also registered financial planner representing Scotia Wealth Management, not Scotia McLeod. It used to be Scotia McLeod. We've changed the name. More appropriate. We're talking on this show about wealth management. Right now we're talking about part of the wealth management process, which is managing your debt load. This is certainly one of the processes, and it's extremely important. What do you think about what we're talking about? Do you have any questions? This is your opportunity to clarify where you stand right now, make a phone call, 604-280-0650. Long distance, 1-877-280-0650. You can log on, see what we look like, www.CIL650.com. And Frida, for those who were shy or reluctant to talk on the air, Frida's down at the office, and you can reach Frida right now at area code 604-737-3512. Long distance, 1-800-661-1495. Now, Blair, you've co-authored a book, When Life Bites You in the Wallet. Is that the name of it?
Yeah, When Life Bites You in the Wallet.
Okay, we gave a bunch of those away the last time you were on the show. You dropped them off at the office, and if you're entitled to one of those books, just drop in, and Frida will have it for you.
Yep.
You want to do that again today?
I'd be happy. Anybody that calls in, a free copy, even autographed, of When Life Bites You in the Wallet.
Well, there you go.
Yep.
And that just kind of encapsulates everything that we're talking about here today on this show. So once again, number to call, 604-280-0650. Long distance, 1-877-280-0650. Log on, www.CIL650.com. And for those who are shy, reluctant to talk on the air for any reason whatsoever, Frida's down at the office, area code 604-737-3512. Long distance, 1-800-661-1495. Now, if you can't remember all those numbers and you're driving your car, I'll give you one number. The number to remember and call, the most important one of all, is 604-737-3512. That's Frida. She's down at the office right now. Give her a call. She can give you the other numbers if it's important to you. And Blair, you might give your number out as well.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so our number with Sands & Associates, pretty straightforward, 310-0911.
So we're talking today about a way that you can relieve your debt problems at virtually no cost. No upfront cost. Are there any tax implications?
No tax implications other than, if you've got a tax debt, we're able to deal with it in the consumer proposal. And the no cost, I should be a little specific. So generally, you make the first payment when you file the proposal. So if it's a $500 a month proposal, you're going to pay that when you file it.
It's going to cost you $500.
Yeah, but, generally, once the proposal is accepted, that's one out of your 60 payments or 36 payments. So really, there's no separate cost to you at all. There's no upfront fee. What you're paying is part of what's the payment's going to be to get you out of debt.
Let's talk to Jim from Vancouver. Jim, welcome to the program. Hi, Jim.
Hello, good morning. Thank you.
Thanks for making the call, Jim. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. My question is, 3 years ago, I owed $33,000 on credit cards, and I had about $50,000 on worth of stocks on the stock market, and I ended up paying that $33,000 back, and took me 3 years of lots of overtime. And I'm just curious, did I make the right decision, or should I have done some proposal or bankruptcy thing?
Well, so I'd say, in hindsight, it's easy to second guess anything. I'd say, Jim, 100% of the time, you made the right decision. If you're able to, whatever, by hook or crook or hunkering down and just really working very hard, if you're able to solve a debt problem without having to do a bankruptcy or a proposal, that's really success. I would applaud yourself, pat yourself on the back. You did the right thing. Many folks, I find, they don't have that same option of, working extra shifts, or maybe they don't have the wages that, really reward them the same way. But, essentially, if you were in a situation 3 years ago where you had $50,000 in assets and $33,000 in debt, if you went to see a trustee would have said to you, I'm sorry, but we probably can't reduce the debt in a consumer proposal because you're not meeting that test of being insolvent. So they probably would have said, well, you could either sell the stocks and pay down the debt, or you can do exactly what you did, which is, just work as hard as you can to pay it back. So I don't think you did the wrong thing. I would say if it was a case where you had, $5,000 of stocks, or, no stocks or something like that, then you probably would have benefited by at least investigating the option, not knowing your monthly income. I don't know if paying back the $33,000 was a real difficult thing for you. I imagine it was. That'd be difficult for anybody. But a proposal might have been good to investigate. But I think because you had so much savings at the time, it probably wouldn't have been an option for you.
No, thank you for that. Though I did, somehow make the right decision. Paying off that debt in 3 years practically killed me. That's why I was making the question.
Yeah, but you know what, Jim? I can even hear it in your voice. You're proud about it, right? You really worked hard and you got it done. So I'm sure it was difficult, but I'm sure you probably won't be in that situation again unless there's no other way to avoid it.
Yeah, hopefully I learned my lesson.
That's
well,
right.
Jim, hindsight's always 20/20, and with the benefit of hindsight, you did make the right decision.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And the fact of the matter is, you preserved your credit and and everything. So, and you're obviously proud of what you did.
Yeah, I got good credit, that's for sure.
Yeah, excellent.
I got one last question, if you don't mind.
Of course, not at all.
I'm just a bit confused if someone's in a position to take either the consumer proposal or a bankruptcy, because I thought you said you get your credit back in either case after 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, so that's a good question, Jim, and it's definitely confusing for a bunch of folks. So there's what the law says, the rules say the credit rating impact will be, and then there's practically what's going to happen. So the law says, or the rules say, after a bankruptcy, for 6 years after the bankruptcy finishes, someone's going to see that you have filed a bankruptcy. The rules say that after a consumer proposal has finished, for 2 years after that, someone's going to see that you have filed a consumer proposal. Credit granting decisions are totally at the option of the person who's either going to advance you or not advance you the funds. So someone can still see that you have a bankruptcy and still agree to advance you credit because they see you've got no other debt and you're going to be a responsible consumer and so on and so forth. So practically, what I've seen is within 2 to 3 years of either a bankruptcy or a proposal, people are getting credit again. They're often getting credit at better rates than before they had filed a bankruptcy or a proposal. If they're getting a mortgage, as long as they've saved the down payment, they're not paying crazy risk premiums, and same on vehicles as well. So even though there is a bankruptcy that shows, practically within 2 to 3 years, most people can rebuild their credit. Now that totally depends on each person and what they do. If you don't do any of the right things, realistically you could never get credit again. But if you do the right things to rebuild, you should be having no issues within 2 to 3 years after either a bankruptcy or a proposal.
Oh, thank you very much. You guys are amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Jim, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your call. You enjoy the rest of the weekend. Take care. Bye. Bye for now. Okay, let's kind of move along. Blair, why do you think there's so many myths and misconceptions about bankruptcy?
Well, obviously, it's a subject that most people don't want to talk about. It's not something that comes up at a cocktail party. We'll talk about a lot of things. We'll talk about, real estate values or things like that, but we don't talk about debt. It's one of the big taboos. So if we don't talk about the problem, we definitely don't talk about the solution. So whenever there's a big vacuum of information, what rushes in to fill that vacuum it's fear, uncertainty, it's doubt, it's lies, it's things that we've heard, that maybe are true somewhere, but aren't true here. So, right off the bat, you were surprised as well, Fred, that we can deal with income tax debt in a bankruptcy or a proposal, and we can deal with student loans. Most people think that's not true because we get a lot of our news from the U.S. where that is the case. You can't deal with income tax debt and you can't deal with student loans.
Well,
if you go bankrupt states.
I understood. I heard from good sources a while back, bankruptcy, no, student loans as well.
Yeah. But in Canada, absolutely,
you can deal with student loans too.
You can deal with it. Now, with student loans, there's a waiting period, so you have to have graduated, you have to have tried to work, and all these things make sense. But as long as it's been more than 7 years since you were a student, student loans are the same as every other debt. Income tax is the same as every other debt. Now, we know income tax is the price of living in this great society. I'm not telling anybody this is a way of avoiding your income tax obligations, but there's no special priority.
No, we just work half the year just to pay the tax man.
Yes, we do. And that's a topic for another show, I'm sure. In some cultures as well, we deal with a lot of Asian cultures or Indo-Canadian cultures. Bankruptcy in the home countries is completely different. In Korea, for example, someone shows up to your door, puts a red tag on it, goes inside, puts a red tag on all your furniture, tells your neighbors all the things I said would never happen here. It does happen in other places. So that's why some of those misconceptions can come about. The biggest way you combat them is just with information. You just get the right facts, you speak to the right people, you go to the right websites, you speak to a trustee, because in general, the facts that you think are correct, the things that are stopping you from taking action because you think it's going to be so horrible, I bet you they're not correct.
Okay, so let's get back onto the topic of trustee. What is a trustee and how can they help?
Well, so a trustee is the most qualified person you could ever see to deal with your situation. And that's the challenging thing, is when you're facing a situation where you got way too much debt and you don't know how to pay it off, you're stressed to the max. Maybe you've got a family, you're probably feeling pretty bad. You're not a great example for your kids. Maybe you're being called at work, so your stress level is through the roof. And you don't know where to turn, so you maybe open the yellow pages or you start Googling or whatever, and you'll see there's a plethora of people out there. There's not-for-profit credit counselors, there's private credit counselors, there's debt consultants, there's financial consultants, there's all these folks that are out there. What people need to understand is the only person that's licensed by the government to actually help you deal with the problem, to actually file a consumer proposal or actually file the bankruptcy, is a trustee. It's not a lawyer, it's not a not-for-profit credit counselor, it's nobody else. So if you're dealing with any other of those individuals, first off, you're not getting somebody that understands the whole suite of what's out there. I had to study, 4 to 5 years to become a trustee after I already had a business degree and already had worked for a couple of years, so I know this stuff pretty cold. If you're going to a non-qualified credit counselor or debt consultant, you're getting somebody who might have minimal qualifications, who I can guarantee you has not studied insolvency law and maybe won't see the complicated issues that might come up in the future. So, first off, come straight to a trustee, but second off, don't ever pay for advice. That's the biggest pitfall that I see people do, is they think, well, a trustee's free and maybe that's too good to be true. I want to hire somebody to advocate on my behalf. Yeah. In general, and I see people spending, from $500 up to $4,000 doing this, you're no better off. You're going to get somebody who's essentially at the end of the day going to introduce you to a trustee, and the trustee's still going to have to do their same analysis, same validation exercise of everything, and you person have just been out a number of either hundreds or thousands of dollars for advice that you could have gotten for free by coming directly to a trustee.
You're closely regulated.
Absolutely. So every trustee in Canada, again, monitored by the superintendent of bankruptcy, and by law we have to give a free consultation where we go through all of the issues. What I'm proud about with Sands and Associates is we do it in an empathetic and non-judgmental way. We think we could very easily be on the other side of the table if these circumstances were to happen to anybody, so it's nobody's role to judge anybody else. And in many cases the folks we see, they've been beaten down so much that the best thing we can do is actually be compassionate and empathetic and be part of the solution.
What is the difference between a trustee and a credit counselor?
Well, for me to call myself a trustee, I have to qualify, I have to do the oral exam,
you can
the
be
multi-day
both.
exam. Yeah, I am both, but it's pretty rare. So
Okay.
There's only 1,000 trustees. There's tens of thousands of different credit counselors. So essentially anybody can call themselves a credit counselor, but to be a trustee you have to be licensed by the government, and you have to keep that license up every year with education.
And the government is federal or provincial?
Federally regulated.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that means, next question is, what does it mean to be federally licensed and regulated?
Well, what it means is what I do, people have to respect. So if someone's taking your wages, for example, the only person that can stop that is someone that's federally licensed. If Canada Revenue Agency is saying, hey, individual, you owe me a bunch of back taxes, I'm going straight to your employer, I'm taking your wages, nobody else can stop that except for a trustee, because a trustee has the power of federal law, and we all know, federal law takes paramountcy over provincial law. So really anything that's going on in your life, if something, you're being called at work, you're being harassed, your assets are being taken, you're being taken to court, the only person that can stop that is a federally licensed insolvency trustee.
You have regular continuing educational requirements?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so every
same
year.
As us,
Yeah.
same thing, almost all professions these days.
Oh yeah, and the law is always changing. So with us, the way I try to explain it to people is, if you look down to the U.S., you see a bunch of bankruptcy attorneys that are advertising their services. You don't see that in Canada because bankruptcy lawyers are prohibited. They've created this role of a trustee, where a trustee knows bankruptcy law inside and out. So much of what I have to do every year is keeping up on case law and developments and how the law is evolving. But you won't find, an insolvency lawyer that can help you with a bankruptcy or a proposal. It's a different role in Canada than it would be in the U.S.
We've probably answered this kind of already, but I'm going to ask it again. Why should I trust a trustee to help me resolve my debts?
Well, so the
kind of answered that one,
yeah,
I think.
I think we had, but let's go with one last, kind of warning point or pitfall. One is, unless you can meet the person in person, I wouldn't trust them. So a trustee, by law, you have to sit down with face-to-face. You might do the initial meeting over the phone or whatever, but you can never do anything official unless you're sitting down, looking the person in the eye, you're understanding that they're as committed to your success as you are. Many unregulated options, you're doing everything over the phone, you're electronically signing things. Maybe the person's in Florida or maybe they're, in New West, who knows. But, in general, unless you're seeing the person face-to-face, you're at risk.
So this is kind of like a contract between you, me, and the person I owe the money to.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's essentially a proposal is a contract between you and your creditors, and I'm the person in the middle, just making sure everyone plays by
You're
the
the
rules
broker.
and making it happen. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked essentially about rebuilding credit.
Hmm.
And when you become overwhelmed, you're heading in the wrong direction. I mean, you're heading for the wall.
Yeah.
Okay. And you got to do something. So what you have to do is either do a proposal or bankruptcy, or try to plow through the whole thing, and that's not probably a good thing to do, right?
It all depends. Again, our example here, where the guy was able to plow through it, Jim with the $33,000 of debt, for him that was the right thing to do. But you're right. If you're dealing with a bankruptcy or a proposal, your credit's going to take a hit. So how do you rebuild it? Well, first off, the number one thing you're going to do as soon as you finish either a bankruptcy or a proposal is, and this sounds a little weird, but you got to acquire more credit, okay? Because until you start getting some positive stories on your credit report, you're never going to get credit again. Now, for some people, and many of my clients that are 80 years old or 70 years old, they very clearly don't want to use credit ever again, and that's fine. So I don't tell them how to rebuild, but if you do want to use credit again, you got to get back in the system, and the way that starts is with a secured credit card.
So the credit agencies that manage this, that's Equifax,
TransUnion.
and TransUnion and Experian. Okay, and the two are the first two, right?
Yep.
So what do they do, these agencies?
Well,
How do they get this information?
Yeah, so each creditor reports to the credit bureaus, and they report to them not on a haphazard basis, but they report to them on an irregular basis. So one thing that's important as you're rebuilding your credit is you've got to look at what's your utilization of balances. So if you've got a $1,000 limit and you're at $900 all the time, you're at 90% utilization. Even if you pay that off every month, sometimes the credit bureau will have reported at mid-month or at 3/4 of the month or something else. They might have given a snapshot when you were at 90% utilization. So if you're constantly bumping up against your limit, potentially your beacon score or your credit score is going to show an impact of that. So it's really important that you understand they could be reporting at any time. They're literally pulling or getting push data from multiple, millions of different data points, every single day, which is why, sometimes there's inaccuracies, but they're putting it all together to try to create this idea of risk, because a credit rating is all about what's the lender's risk, what's their profitability going to be for this individual. So one thing they're also looking at too is, are you missing payments? The number one reason why people don't get approved for a mortgage, and you can see this breaking someone's heart, is they haven't paid their cell phone on time. So a $50 cell phone bill can compromise them for hundreds of thousands of dollars of mortgage, because it speaks to a pattern of the person either honoring their obligations all the time or not necessarily, being loosey-goosey or taking things, a little easy with respect to their obligations.
We have to go to the break. So we're going to go to the break, and when we come back, we're going to continue to talk with Blair Menton about debt management. Don't go away.
Fred Snyder.
Statistically, if you take 100 people who start out equal today at the age of 25, by the time they end up at 65, 1 is wealthy, 4 are well-to-do, 5 are still working, 36 are dead, and the rest are dead broke, dependent on family and state. That's over half the people who start at equal at age 25, by the time they end up at 65, are dependent on family and state. And that's a sad state of statistics.
Fred Snyder.
You need a blueprint that says, this is where you're at right now, and this is where you want to go, and this is the way to get there.
Fred Snyder.
So isn't it time to get that good, warm, fuzzy feeling because you know exactly where you're at? You know that your investments are going to work for you. You know that you have the right investments inside your financial plan. You're confident about the future because you've covered all the bases. You know exactly how much life insurance you need, and you have the right amount of insurance. You have a financial advisor, such as myself, or somebody that's equally competent that you can check with to determine whether you're on track or not. And whether you're on track or not, I'd like to use the analogy, do you have a GPS?
Fred's got your GPS. Talk to Fred. Listen to Fred. Fred Snyder. Sunday mornings 9 to 11 on CIL 650. Welcome back to It's Your Money on CIL 650. If you have a question for Fred, call 604-280-0650. Now, back to Fred.
Okay, we're back. Remind you once again, ladies and gentlemen, listeners out there, this is a live show. Very live. We're talking about your money, more importantly about your money and how to keep it. And one of the ways to keep your money is to properly manage your debt. I think the educational process should be to learn everything you can about debt. And there's good debt and there's bad debt. I mean, if you're carrying a balance on your MasterCard or your Visa and you're paying 20% interest, that's in after-tax dollars. Okay? So you had to earn $1, pay 50 cents tax to have 50 cents left to pay that 20% on that debt. Remember that. When you spend money, is it before tax or after tax dollars? Very important. And get a budget. Don't spend more than you earn. If you spend more than you earn, you got to borrow the money to cover it. Or you got to cash out investments to cover the shortfall. You got to pay it. You can't just ignore it. But don't do it blindly. Not having a budget is like me trying to get back to Vancouver by way of driving in the fog or with a bag over my head. I'm not going to get there. Okay? You got to be able to see your financial future. What does your financial future look like? And again, just because you became overwhelmed by debt doesn't mean you're a bad person. Not at all. Sometimes things happen. Let's talk to Marie in North Vancouver. Marie, welcome to the program.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Marie.
I have a question for Blair.
Yes.
I'm considering doing a consumer proposal. I currently have a debt load of about $23,000, and it's all between my Visa and a line of credit through the bank. Mm-hmm. And I've been a client of this bank for about 25 years now, so absolutely everything that I do is through this one bank, including a TFSA and whatnot. So if I do go through that process, is it better to start fresh with another bank before I start considering with the proposal?
So, Marie, thank you very much for the question. I think it's very useful because my general recommendation is never to combine your daily banking and your debts. Okay, so in your situation, the very short answer, and I think the right answer, is absolutely yes. Start a fresh start with another bank, at least for a period of time. The reason I say that is banks have what's called the right of offset, and my experience is that if I file a consumer proposal or a personal bankruptcy with someone and they're still banking day to day with that institution, even though the law protects the individual, that as soon as a bankruptcy or a proposal has been filed, the bank is not allowed to seize any funds or close accounts or anything like that. In practicality, the bank presses a button on their system and right away the person's bank account is seized. You know, maybe their paycheck has just went into it, and I'll write all the letters that I can, but it'll take me probably 3 weeks or a month to get everything unwound. So the easy way is if you start off with a new bank, they're not even going to have any notification of the bankruptcy or the proposal because you don't owe them any money, so they don't have to be notified. So there's going to be no interruption. Your bank might be great, and based on 25 years of a client relationship, there might be no interruptions to you, but I would just hate to see it as soon as you file the proposal to deal with the debt, your next paycheck gets seized. So I would say at least for a couple months, go with the new bank. You don't need to close the old account, and if they leave it open, well, then go back to it within a couple months. Your only risk is going to be upfront.
Okay. All right. That's
Does that help?
great. Okay. Thank you so much.
Maria, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your call, and she gets the book, eh?
Yes, of course, yes.
The book, When Life Bites You in the Wallet.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, thank you so much, and to you also, Fred. Thank you for all that you do. I really appreciate your show. I listen every week, and it's very useful, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Marie, and you touch base with Frida to get that book, okay?
Okay, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks for the call. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
And you too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thanks, Marie.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Maria's line is now open, so again, if you're out there, you're listening to the show, call us. Remember, we're here to answer your questions. We're here to deal with your comments. We're here to help you do better financially by teaching you what you need to know to make better financial decisions. And we're focusing today, we're very focused today, we're talking only about 1 of 10 steps in the financial planning process, and it's called debt management. So how do you manage your debts? Best way to learn how to do that is to get your book. Read that book. It's good information. Read the Smith Maneuver. Learn how to make your debts tax deductible. Attend my seminars and workshops. I have one coming up called 46 Ways to Ease the Tax Bite. Okay, 46 ways to reduce the amount of legally, to reduce the amount of tax that you pay. And again, all callers, doesn't cost a dime. You got to book that with Frida. So we'll be doing that one within a month. So get in the line and give us a call. Once again, we're talking about your money and how to keep it. So the number to call is 604-280-0650. Long distance, 1-877-280-0650. You can log on, www.cal650.com. Frida's down at the office right now. You can call her at area code 604-737-3512. If you're calling long distance, it's 1-800-661-1495. Okay, let's get a little more specific about CRA, taxes. How does Sands and Associates help with tax debt?
Well, pretty simply, Fred, we're the only people that can actually reduce tax debt. So if you've got an issue with Canada Revenue Agency where they say that you owe them a ton of money and you're considering, do I dispute it? Do I go for interest relief? Do I try to take him to court, so on and so forth? I'm not telling you don't do those things, but I see a lot of people where they've taken every route possible, and at the end of the day, CRA still wins. CRA can afford far more lawyers than most of us can afford, and for the most part, what I've seen is most of the time CRA is right. They've made an assessment and you might not like it, but you're going to have to deal with it one way or the other, whether you like it or not. The only way you can make a deal with CRA is not to negotiate with them, it's to make a consumer proposal. Or if you can't make a deal with them in a consumer proposal, the only way you can eliminate the debt is to file a personal bankruptcy. Tax debt, and I think we all understand this, it's not the same as credit card debt. There's a statute of limitations for many debts in Canada, credit card debt being one of them. There's no statute of limitations for amounts that you owe to the government. So it's pay now or pay later, or deal with it now or deal with it later, but it's not going to go away. The number one thing that I see too is a lot of people, when they think they've got a tax issue, is they just stop filing their returns. They just go silent on CRA. That's the worst thing. The worst possible thing you could ever do.
You can run, but you can't hide.
Exactly. And whether you intend this or not, some people do and some people don't, you not filing your returns is you thumbing your nose at CRA. It's you saying, I'm going to take benefits from being in this society, but not even, have the courtesy to give my information to the government. And, I understand some people feel very, at odds with CRA at times, but you've absolutely got to file. It's when you don't file, they take this tool out of their arsenal, which is, basically like a nuclear weapon here. It's called the arbitrary assessment, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's this arbitrary thing you have no idea about. They're going to look at your bank records. They're going to have information you never even seen before, perhaps, and they're going to say, here's what we think you owe us, and good luck disproving us. So if you don't file your taxes, they're going to find a number for you, and you're probably not going to like it.
They can take any position they want, is what you're saying, and you have to prove they're wrong.
Yeah, and the easier way to do that is just not to make them do that, not to make them do an arbitrary assessment is by filing. But if you don't do it, eventually they're going to go based on information. And, many times it's every dollar that hit your bank account for that year. And if you're a small business person, obviously every dollar that hit your bank account wasn't income. You had a bunch of costs you had to pay out, and you made no money that year. But good luck convincing CRA of that. So you absolutely have to file, even if it's bad news. You have to file.
Can you share an example of a tax debt situation you've helped resolve?
Sure. Yeah. We deal with these situations pretty well all the time. One profession that I tend to see a little bit more often than others is that of a realtor. And I think the challenge there is, realtors, it's very much you eat what you kill, meaning that if you don't sell a house, you're probably not eating that month. And if you do sell a house, you make a lot of money, but it's a very sporadic income. So, it's not every month you're making the same thing.
All over the map.
Right. So oftentimes at the end of the year, I'll sit with some realtors who don't think they had a great year, but, when we look at the numbers, actually there were some tax remittances that should have been made. So there was one gentleman that I was dealing with. He was a realtor. He's about 46 years old. His income really declined over the last 3 years, which what I find in real estate as well is a lot of people think, well, next year I'm going to make more. I'm going to clear off the tax bill.
Sure, you're optimistic.
Yeah, and for many years, especially in the Lower Mainland, that's exactly what happened. But when it starts to go the other way, then sometimes you have a debt that you can't service. Now, with him as well, he had a growing family. So there was him and his wife, and then they just had a new baby, which his wife was required to take some mat leave. So for him, he had $64,000 of debt, and just over half of that was tax debt. So, it was about $34,000 of tax debt, and then the balance was credit card debt. He was getting a bunch of calls from his collectors, and CRA was really threatening him. So they hadn't implemented all of the remedies yet because he had filed, but they were threatening him that unless we start to see some really significant payments, we're going to be freezing your account. We're going to be going to your real estate brokerage and starting to garnish you some of your income, basically forcing him to take some action, and he didn't know what to do. So we sat down, we reviewed the entire situation. We did exactly similar to the example this morning, Fred. I asked him about, all the debts so I could understand everything. I wanted to understand the circumstances of how it arose. Was it the case that this is a systemic issue he's really got to correct, or is it the case he just got behind and, some things happened? Because really, if his family hadn't grown, if his spouse wasn't off on mat leave, he probably would have been able to deal with this. But the combination of all of those factors. So we understood this is something that we've got to help him out with, and a proposal is a good option because he's still selling houses. He's still making income. It's not his income has went to zero. It's just a little bit lower than what it was. So what we were able to do for him is we're able to file a consumer proposal for him to repay 34 cents on the dollar. So just over a third of the debt. So where he came in, he owed $64,000. CRA was asking for more than $1,000 a month from him for back taxes, and then his minimum payments on his credit cards were also over $1,000 a month. It was impossible. We were able to reduce it to $450 over 48 months. No interest, no extra fees, 48 times 450. He's debt-free at the end of it, and his ambition is to pay it off sooner than 48 months if he's able, to get his income going again the right way, sell a bunch of houses.
Which can easily happen.
Which could happen, yeah.
Could go either way.
Okay, it could definitely go either way. The reason CRA accepted this is because we showed them the analysis that if he was to file for a bankruptcy, now, first off as well, he's a realtor. If he files for bankruptcy, is he going to be as motivated, to go out and give his all and, try to sell every house when he feels, so
Would
bad
he be
about
able to
having
even
done
keep
this?
his real estate license?
There's also that challenge too. Is yes is the answer. In general, he can keep it, but he's got to notify his brokerage. Is he going to get all the right leads if he's in bankruptcy? Maybe, maybe not, but it's going to compromise his ability to earn income. In the proposal, he can go out, he can earn income. He's giving a fair recovery back, which is far greater than what he would have paid in a bankruptcy. So let's not lose this fact here. Is in every case, everyone who does a consumer proposal, they could have paid less in a bankruptcy. They could have taken an easier way out, and creditors would have had to accept it. He wanted to pay more. He wanted to not go into bankruptcy, which is exactly what he did. So for this gentleman, he wasn't happy about the whole situation, because no one's ever happy of not being able to pay, but he at least had a little bit of pride of, this is what I can afford. I'm going to feel good that this isn't the easy way out, and I'm going to be back to being debt-free in 4 years or less.
I've run into situations where I've talked to clients who haven't filed a tax return in the last 6 years, we'll say. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Because they're going to catch up to that.
Oh, yeah, eventually.
Sooner or later.
Yeah, and in a world where we're getting more information rather than less. Right?
And you have these voluntary declarations that they can make now. How does that work?
Yeah, you can make a voluntary disclosure. Oftentimes they'll give you a break on the interest and penalties and so on and so forth. The biggest thing is don't spend huge amounts of time trying to work out, what's the best way for me to do it. Just file the returns. Just get the information in the system.
Even if you can't pay, just file the return.
Even if you can't pay it, yeah. You've just, not filing is the worst thing. If you file and you can't pay it, they'll often be very reasonable with you. CRA will often work out a payment plan. If it's, a few $1,000s, they're not going to go to your employer. But if it's significant and you keep them in the dark, that's when you're going to have some problems. Let's
talk to Tracy from Vancouver. Tracy, welcome to the program. Hi, Tracy.
Almost took away my my little discussion, because that's exactly what I was going to mention. Was as you know, Fred, I do a fair amount of traveling, and so one year in 2000, excuse me, I just woke up in 2013. I left Vancouver on January the 4th, or something like that, and I didn't get back until May the 20-something or other. And therefore, I was going to get, I thought, a late filing charge for my taxes for the year before, because, of course, when I leave, I didn't have any T4s, T3s, nothing. But what I did do was I wrote a quick letter to the CRA, and I told them that I would be out of town until such and such a date due to traveling, and I would be back at a certain time. So off I went on my 4.5-month cruise, and when I returned, I went ahead and filed my taxes, and I realized that I never got charged a late filing charge. So when I at some later date I talked to CRA's a gentleman from CRA, and he told me he said, you filed your taxes by letting us know. And I thought, oh, you mean I didn't have to have all the paper and everything? He says, no, we just put your information on hold with this information that you sent us. So you're not really late filing because you've told us. And so the filing is letting them know what you're going to be doing.
Yeah, and I think, Tracy, you just really separated yourself from so many folks that they deal with because, you understand the folks in the area, they're reasonable people. At the end of the day, we're all taxpayers. And in many cases, communication is as good as cash. So just by letting them know the little courtesy call, you just saw that was the benefit to you is they didn't ding you with a penalty that they could have easily dinged you with because you reached out to them. So I think that's a good best practice for folks to take on.
Right, and I think that's really important for people to understand. Whether you're going on strike at work, you let your bank know. The bank doesn't want your house or your car. The bank just wants to know what's going on, and I think it's very important to keep the lines of communication open. I was really kind of worried. I didn't know what the late filing charge was going to be and all that stuff. And then I realized I didn't have a late filing charge because I really, in their definition, by my communicating with CRA, I had let them know I had filed. They said, well, you filed when you sent us your letter.
Right.
And I went, oh, okay. So just kind of interesting to let everybody know that they aren't unreasonable human beings.
They're not a bunch of ogres.
Yeah.
No, and even when I'm dealing with Canada Revenue Agency on a consumer proposal, oftentimes it is personal negotiations with the agent at CRA, and almost to a person, they're reasonable. They want to get the right solution. Again, they want the best for the taxpayer as a whole. So yeah, CRA is not a boogeyman here, but they will make your life miserable if you go silent on them.
Right.
Disrespect them essentially. Just treat them reasonably. They're folks trying to do a difficult job.
Right, yep. Exactly. Okay, well, thank you.
Tracy,
you guys have a nice weekend.
Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Can't tell you how much I appreciate your call. Bye for now.
Okay, bye-bye.
Let's talk to Dan from Powell River. Dan, welcome to the program.
Hi, Blair.
Hi.
Hi, Dan. I'm listening to your show. Boy, this is enlightening and great stuff.
Good.
Yeah, I'm an electrician from construction. I'm retired now. And I've always had very, very good credit, and I had no problem getting credit cards and stuff like that, But now, as I retired, and I'm still paying my debt because I've always been responsible, and the cards and all that. And now I'm finding it a heavy burden on me. And I never thought in my life I would ever think about bankruptcy, but I think that it's possible I might want to do it after consulting with you.
Yep.
A couple of questions, if I can just kind of jump in here.
The question is, should I or should I not? Or keep plugging away? It's a very heavy burden on me.
I'm going to try to answer your question. In order to answer that, I need some information.
Okay.
Number one, what is your net worth?
My net worth is, I'm renting.
This is the difference between your assets and your liabilities.
My net worth is zero.
You have no net worth. Okay,
no.
That's important. Second part of the equation is, at the end of the month, do you have a balanced budget, a deficit, or a surplus?
It's always a deficit.
Then you're a candidate.
About $1,000, I guess. I have a credit line at the bank.
Right.
And it's always maxed out at the end of the month. Sometimes I'm even under the $2,500 credit limit.
You must be over 60 or 65 because you're retired.
73.
Okay.
73.
So I would say that he's a candidate, right?
It definitely sounds that way. So yeah, Dan, let's get a bit more information. So how much are the debts in total?
I think it runs about 40,000 on the cards.
40,000.
I got four cards. I think four.
Yeah, that's definitely significant. It's all across different credit cards, right? So they're probably high teens or 20% interest, something like that.
Yeah, I saw about 20, and it's all on cards.
Right. Okay, and you're up to date on your taxes, just to our last discussion.
Yes.
Okay. What's your monthly income, Dan?
It's about under. Well, there's two of us.
Yep.
It's under 30.
So under 30,000 in a year, you mean?
Yes.
Okay, so roughly 2,500 per month or something like that. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're actually below the low income guideline for a two-person household. So Dan, it's not a run, don't walk. It's not like that. But I think you should come in and sit down with the trustee, because I think what you're going to be looking towards here is definitely you could consider a consumer proposal. You could offer to pay back a third of the debt, which would be probably $13,000. But I don't think that's the right option here, given that the budget for two people on $2,500 of take home a month. That's not easy to do no matter what. And given that 73 years old, I hope your health gives you another 30 plus years. But to sign on for 4 or 5 or 3 years of payments, that might be a big commitment at this point. So what I would suggest to you is that if you look into the alternative of a bankruptcy, it's pretty likely a bankruptcy in your case would finish within 9 months. Have you ever filed a bankruptcy in your life, Dan, or would this be a first time?
No.
Okay. So for someone who's never been in bankruptcy before, it's possible for it to be resolved within 9 months. And the amounts that you would have to pay is just the minimum fees set by government tariff, which is $200 for each of those months. So 200 times 9 for $1,800. I would guess that on $40,000 of debt, your minimum payments are probably over $1,000 per month. So if you're some way, shape, or form trying to make those payments, you're obviously going to see a big relief if all you have to pay is $200 over 9 months, and then that's it. That goes away, and you never have to pay again.
Okay. Now, my girlfriend, we've been together for 20 years, and she has a credit card. Mm-hmm. Does she have to put hers in the bankruptcy too?
No. So first off, are you sure it's just her credit card? The statements only come in her name. They don't come in both of your names?
No, she has a one credit card only in her name.
Right. So yeah, this is really great, Frank. This is a big misconception people have, is if you marry somebody or you cohabitate with them, do you suddenly become responsible for their debts? Absolutely not, is the answer. So her debts are completely separate. Now, she could very clearly, if she wanted to do a proposal or a bankruptcy, she could do so, but it would only cover her debts, and anything that you do with your debts is not going to impact her or her credit or her assets. You're completely separate, even if you've been married for 50 years. As long as you're not sharing the debts, there's nothing legally that the creditors can pursue one for the other.
Okay, but if you're married and she has a card, that's different.
Oh, no. So very clearly, Dan, there's no difference.
There's no difference.
Whether you're married or not. Oh, this is huge, right? Most people think you marry somebody, you marry your debt. Absolutely not. So
the wife can have her own credit card and in her name and keep it.
Yeah, yep. Yeah. So the way this became really clear to me is if you look at some really successful entrepreneurs, the entrepreneur has all of the debt typically because they're at risk. If something goes wrong, and then it's the spouse that typically has all of the assets because if the person has to go into bankruptcy, well then the spouse at least wouldn't lose the family house, for example. So the short thing is there's nothing automatically that makes a spouse liable for the other person's debts. It's only if you're divorcing or splitting up, then the husband can claim against the wife. Well, I incurred all this debt, but really it's our debt, but that doesn't give Royal Bank or CIBC or anybody else the ability to collect. It's only between the spouses.
Okay. Now, I think I'll phone your office to see if you have a trustee in my town.
Yeah, we've got somebody in Nanaimo. There are some excellent trustees up near Campbell River, so Derek Chase and Associates is one I recommend without reservation.
Powell River, that's on this side, eh?
Oh, I'm sorry. Powell River's on this side?
Powell River, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was thinking of Campbell River. My apologies.
No.
Okay, yeah, Dan, give us a call, and yeah, we'll see if we can get...
Is there anybody in Powell River?
No one that I'm aware of, but I know there are trustees that travel there, so I'm sure we can figure it out, Dan. If you give us a call, we'll figure out which trustee goes there, and we'll get you some good help.
And the number?
And my number, again, is 310-0911. That should be toll-free within BC.
Okay, 310-0911.
Yes.
Well, I thank you very much, and I certainly appreciate you're coming into the station and enlightening everybody, because this is wonderful stuff.
Oh, excellent. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Okay, Dan, thanks for calling. And Dan's line is now open, so you're out there, you're listening to this show, you want to attend our next seminar, you want to get a complimentary written financial plan, you have a question or a comment, you want to participate in the show, give us a call. If you're too shy to do that, you can call Frida. She's down at the office right now. You can reach her at 604-737-3512. And again, if you call the show, we have a great book, When Life Bites You in the Wallet. Blair has given those away, and all callers will receive that. So far, we haven't given too many books away, so get on the line. This is an important subject, okay? I think the most important thing that you could do for yourself, for your kids, your grandchildren, is learn more about how to manage your debt and pass that information on to your descendants. But fundamentally, get yourself a document called a written financial plan. It's a blueprint that says, here's where I am today. Here's a list of my goals, and this is how I'm going to achieve them. When I'm talking about goals, I'm talking, in this case, about financial goals. So we've been talking about bankruptcy and dealing with taxes. Let's talk about student loans.
Mm-hmm.
Is it any different?
Yeah, so the big difference between student loans and taxes, so obviously both are amounts owed to the government, so let's talk about how they're similar first. So both are amounts owed to the government. Both are amounts that you absolutely have to deal with because they are able to shortcut all of the normal collection procedures that, a bank or a Visa or a MasterCard has to go through. So same with the tax debt. If you don't pay your student loan, they can go directly to your employer. They can take usually up to about a third of your wages and at very little notice to you. So normally if someone's suing you, you're going to know and you're going to hear about it and all this. The government can basically go straight to your employer and you're not going to know a whole lot about it, or they can start seizing assets from you. So when we're dealing with student loans, the big difference between student loans and tax debt is that there's a waiting period. So government says, and there's a lot of logic behind this, that if someone goes very heavily into debt and they graduate, the expectation is that they're going to spend a bunch of time earning income to service that debt. So obviously if someone studies to become a chiropractor, for example, they might have $80,000 of student loan debt. They're not going to be able to pay that off in the first couple of years out of school, but hopefully 10 or 15 years they will have built up a practice and they're going to be able to pay all that back. They will have gotten benefit and they will have paid back the obligations. So what the government has said is for the first 7 years after you graduate from school, if you do a bankruptcy or a consumer proposal, because you still might need the help, whatever all of your other debts are going to be eliminated at the end of that, but your student loan debt will survive. So if you go bankrupt 2 years out of school and you have $100,000 of debt, but $30,000 is student loans, at the end of the bankruptcy, you will still owe that $30,000 of student loans because it was not 7 years since you graduated. There's an extra provision that if it has been 5 years and you can show to the court that you're experiencing hardship, you've done your best, but you're really not going to pay this off, well, and then it's still an option, but that's not an easy route that you make in your own court application, having to convince a judge. The more common thing is I'll have people come in to see me after 4 or 5 years out of school. We'll talk about the benefits of acting now versus the benefits of trying to hunker down, trying to get through what you can over the next couple of years, and taking some action once it has been 7 years.
Okay, so student loans, tax debt, fall under your jurisdiction.
Absolutely. I'm the only person that can deal with those debts. There's no other professional in Canada that can help you deal with a government debt other than a trustee.
So if you're up to your eyeballs in debt, you have this huge debt load, this is the number to call.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
Get on the line, give us a call.
What I'm seeing more and more with student loans is I'm seeing them getting increasingly aggressive and doing wage seizures on people I never thought they would do wage seizures on. Like I'm talking people that are making $2,000 or $2,500 per month. They're barely above the poverty line, and student loans is starting to seize their wages. If that happens, even if it hasn't been 7 years, still come and see a trustee because there still might be some good options that make sense. For example, it still might make sense to do a consumer proposal, excuse me, where at least you're going to freeze the payments at $150 or $200 per month instead of $500 per month. Sure. Yeah, you're still going to owe the balance at the end of it, but at least they're not seizing your wages. At least you got a payment that you can afford. So a trustee can still help you reduce the payment even if you're still going to owe the money at the end. But the best case is really do your best for 7 years. If you're still experiencing hardship, then investigate your options.
We have to go to the break. When we come back, we'll continue to talk about one of the steps in the financial planning process, debt management. Don't go away. So you got to start thinking about how you're spending your money.
Fred Snyder.
If you can reduce the amount of tax you pay, that means that you get a tax refund. So you get a tax refund means you've really overpaid your taxes. And if you overpay your taxes, what you've really done is loan money to the government. So rule number 1 of my 46 ways to ease the tax bite is don't lend your money to the government.
Fred Snyder.
So pay your taxes. We're not talking about not paying your taxes. We're talking about legal ways to reduce the taxes you pay, not avoid them, to reduce the taxes you pay so that you can have more money to save and invest so that you can achieve your financial goals sooner. And if you're already there, stay there longer, because once you get there, it's your obligation to stay there.
Fred Snyder.
If you have a financial plan and you're somewhere in the middle and you're wondering, what tweaks that you should make in that plan to make it what you really want it to be, time to make a phone call. Or if maybe you're just getting started out and you want to get a starter plan, maybe it's time to talk to somebody like myself and get yourself on the right track.
Fred Snyder.
I think that everybody needs to go and make an appointment to see Fred.
Talk to Fred. Listen to Fred. Fred Snyder. Sunday mornings 9 to 11 on CIL 650. This is CISL Vancouver. Smooth and easy.
CIL 650.
You're listening to It's Your Money on CIL 650. Once again, here is Fred Snyder.
Okay, we're back, ladies and gentlemen, and again, I remind you, we're giving away written financial plans, we're giving away advice, we're teaching you what you need to know to make better financial decisions. Take 100 people, here we go again, 100 people, started equal today at the age of 25. By the time they end up at 65, 1 is wealthy, 1 out of 100. 4 are well-to-do, 5 are still working, 36 are dead, there's 54 left, they're dead broke, depending on family and state. Dead broke. Is that the way you want to end up? Because primarily and fundamentally, the reason these people fail financially is lack of a plan. They don't have a plan. They don't have a document, a blueprint, whatever you want to call it. Would you build a house without a blueprint? Would you try to build a business and create a business without a business plan? You would never do that. Well, what about your personal wealth? Then why would you try to become wealthy personally without a plan? You need a plan. So it's time to get on the line and make a phone call. Complimentary plan. If you do that, see it at our next workshop, which will be 46 ways to ease the tax bite. I actually have 101, but I chose 46 because it was too long. I had to shorten it down. We got some callers coming in right now. Let's talk to Maria from Vancouver. Maria, welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Hi, Maria.
I have a question about when you do a proposal. Obviously, if you have credit card debts, personal line of credit with this particular bank, all of those cards go, right? Mm-hmm. And let's say I do have another card with another bank that I have no debt with. Am I allowed to keep that credit card or no?
So thank you for the call, Maria. And that's a very common question we get with a consumer proposal, is because it's really difficult to live without credit these days. So, the rules in a consumer proposal is you're supposed to turn in all credit cards to the trustee, even a card that has a zero balance. Mm-hmm. So to your question, if you have a card from another bank that doesn't have any debt against it, yes, you're supposed to turn that in as part of the consumer proposal. The logic behind it is the whole idea that a proposal is supposed to get you to a fresh start. So it's supposed to be you owe nothing to anybody at the end of it, and if you're allowed to keep, one card or 2 cards, it might be $500 now, but at the time the proposal's finished, it could be thousands of dollars. You might be in a bad situation. That's the logic behind the law. I can't say I 100% agree with it because, it does make things a bit difficult in this modern age. What people typically do, if you need to still use a credit for, day-to-day purchases, is 2 things. One is if you're lucky enough that your employer provides you with a credit card, if they can make you, a card holder on their corporate card, that's an option. What's more common is if you have somebody in your life, whether it's a significant other or a family member, if they've got a card account and they make you a supplementary card holder, that is fine. That doesn't have to be turned into the trustee. You can do that before or after the proposal process, but those are really your only ways typically, are either to be a supplementary card holder with your employer or with someone else. Now, typically, as soon as you're in a consumer proposal, you're able to get a secured credit card, so you'll be able to put down a deposit and get a card with a lower limit. That's going to function exactly the same as just about every other credit card, except you can't get into trouble because you can't spend beyond whatever the deposit is. But in the short term, there could be a little bit of an interruption, which is unfortunately an inconvenient cost of the process. Mm-hmm. Does that help, Maria?
That helps. I have another question.
Of course.
Does your employer have to know that you have filed for consumer proposal?
So that's a great question. Absolutely not is the answer. Okay, so the only reason I ever have to reach out to an employer is if your wages are being taken and I'm the person that's going to stop that. So obviously I have to tell the employer to stop paying that person. Now, some professions you may have a duty to disclose, and that's between you and your employer. So, a lawyer may have to disclose, or, some bank employees may have to disclose, but most of the time not. The law protects you that even if your employer found out, you can never be terminated, you can never be disciplined, nothing can ever be held against you for having done on a bankruptcy or a consumer proposal. But I will tell you off the top, if it's a consumer proposal, the only people that are notified is the people you owe money to and my regulator and the court system, basically all of the people that have to administer it, but your employer is not one of those parties.
Okay. Is there still a chance for another question?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. If I owe in these credit cards that I'm thinking, okay, this is too much for me to carry, that I also have RESP or RSP or TFSA with a little bit on that. All of that is going to turn into that debt, right, before I do the proposal?
No, so not necessarily. So Maria, you're in the good situation that you want to have, something to try to preserve at the end of the proposal. So, in general, as long as the proposal is structured the right way, so you got to make sure that you see a trustee, that does a lot of proposals, there should be no issue with you keeping the RESP and keeping the TFSA. If the proposal isn't structured the right way, you might surrender those, but, it's all going to be at your option. There should be nothing forced upon you. You mentioned RRSPs as well, and again, very clearly, RRSPs shouldn't figure into this. They're protected assets. You wouldn't have to give them up either in a bankruptcy or a proposal.
Is the TFSA protected as well?
TFSA is not protected at all. Gotcha. But if it's a consumer proposal, again, if you structure the proposal the right way, it's that I will retain the TFSA, but you'll make enough payments that the creditors would be better off than if you filed for bankruptcy and they took the TFSA. So it sounds like they're kind of small amounts there anyway for now, Maria, but the answer is no, they shouldn't be collapsed and cashed in as long as the proposal is structured correctly.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Maria, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your call. You take care. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
You as well. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Maria's line is now open, and I guess we got time for a few more calls. We got lots of callers on the line right now. We got Judy from Vancouver. Judy, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Judy.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My call was sort of answered just now by the lady, by the discussion, and it's just that it's more a comment that it's so easy for people to get into debt right now because of the cost of living and people on pensions. And, I'm sort of thinking, it's really hard for people with lower incomes to not get into debt because of the high expense in Vancouver. But keeping on track means getting a financial plan, and I think that's the key thing for people, not to be afraid to approach Fred or Frida to go in and get some plan, so it helps them be confident, because I know people that are so afraid to open their mail because of the debt, and I don't have any debt personally at the moment, but I know how hard it is not to get into debt.
Well, it takes discipline. It takes a lot of discipline to stay out of debt.
Oh, yeah. And Judy, you've hit my fastest growing clients that I have is actually the over 65, and I'm up, more than 300% in the last about 3 years. So it just blows us away. And this is not a positive thing, but there's a lot of folks who are on fixed incomes, and you're right, the cost of living goes up every year. A lot of things that used to be free, we pay for, cell phones, bottled water. If you go through what you're spending money on, every month, a lot of it you couldn't have spent money on it, 20 or 30 years ago. So yeah, it's very tough to make ends meet. The cost of living here is high, and yeah. What I've seen is, again, the retirement age, they're really having a bit of a tough time. There's always hope, and that's the thing. If someone is listening and they're really struggling with a lot of debt, sometimes it's just some counseling from me about, well, here's the remedies that your creditors have. If you're 80, 85 years old, you don't have a whole lot to worry about, and maybe bankruptcy is not even a requirement here. You just need some coaching. So just getting the right information is what's really key, but I agree with you, Judy. It's a tough situation for a lot of folks.
Yeah, and when I listen to the budget or whatever of the government, the Liberal government this year, it was the poor people, the low income, that got the hit with the higher medical expenses. The hydro is going up. It's all the people on a low income that are going to be hit the hardest, it said on CBC.
And we're heading for more deficit financing because Trudeau says he's going to rebuild the infrastructure of Canada with debt.
Right.
So government debt is going to go up. That may end up being a good thing. That's a call that you have to make.
Yeah.
Is there a time when a government deficit is a good thing? That's the question.
Yeah, depends on what school
I find all that scary.
Judy, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your call. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Thank you so much.
Take care. I'll make
Bye-bye.
sure you get that book. Again, all callers get the book, When Life Bites You in the Wallet. Okay, let's talk to Urit. Urit, I guess is the way you pronounce it, from South Delta. Urit, welcome to the program.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. And it is Urit, the pronunciation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I had a question in reference to beneficiaries and trustees. Let's say the family members who are beneficiaries and they also are appointed trustees on the trust from the parent that passed away. So in reference to credit card debts, what happens to that? If it's in let's see, the person who passed away, who would it be called? The deceased, right?
Okay, so Urit, let me make sure I understand the fact pattern here. So someone's passed away, and they had a bunch of credit card debt.
Yeah.
And then you're saying the assets that they held were actually in trust for somebody else. Is that correct?
No. Let's see. The person who passed away, the credit card was in their name.
Yes. Okay.
Right?
Yep.
And so there is still an outstanding balance that needs to be paid, that was being paid off every month.
Yep.
While the person, the deceased, was alive.
Yep.
So now, when they passed away, all this is stated in the trust itself, so that the beneficiaries, they have to carry out whatever needs to be done, but it doesn't say anything about credit cards being paid off. So I don't know what the laws are on that.
Okay, so when the individual passed away, did he or she have any assets?
Yes.
They have significant assets?
Say it again?
Did they have more assets than the amount of money that's owing on the debts?
Yes, I would say so, yes.
Okay. So what it sounds like to me, so first off, I have to tell you, so I'm not a trustee in the extent of, handling wills or estates or things like that.
Different type of trustee.
Yeah, I'm a trustee in the extent of, doing bankruptcy consumer proposals. So what I was trying to understand, is it a case where, the estate passed away, or the individual passed away and the estate has a bunch of debts and no assets? And I was going to tell you, well, and if that's the case, I wouldn't worry too much about the debts. Obviously you can't get blood from a stone or from someone who's not living anymore.
Right.
So, those debts wouldn't need to be paid. If it is the case where there's significant assets and the person has passed away, I would think that the executor or executrix, they'd be obligated to pay those debts before they distribute assets.
They would.
Yeah, and Fred, you might be more of an expert than me on this.
Yeah, for sure. It's the job of the executor, trustee, whatever you want to call that particular person,
right,
to pay the debts that are outstanding if there's sufficient assets there to do it.
Okay.
That's the final step, really.
So then, in other words, then they would just come to the credit card company and say that we'll be paying it all off, or can they make an arrangement with them whereby they would be paying it off till it's paid off?
I'm not a lawyer, but I would say probably not, but there's a possibility. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I would think just by, contacting the credit card companies and trying to work out a payment arrangement, they'll be happy to hear from you, because a lot of the time someone passes away, regardless of whether there's assets, they don't get paid. So I would expect they'll be very happy to work out a mutually acceptable payment plan. I would say if it's a case there's more assets in the estate than there are debts, I don't think you're going to be very successful in getting a reduction in the principal, but I would try to push them on the interest. I would say, you know what, I know this is your standard interest. We want to do a reasonable payment plan here. Let's at least get something reduced if it's going to take us over time.
So have them reduce the interest rate.
I think that's a pretty reasonable request to make.
I think so too. Yeah, that was my.
But if that debt, for example, were extended out for 10 years or something like that, there's no way under pure logic that would be allowable.
Oh no.
That wouldn't make a lot of sense.
If there's sufficient assets to pay it off, I think it's incumbent upon the executor to pay off the debt.
Correct.
And cancel the card.
Yeah, exactly.
There may be exceptions to that, and that's why I say I'm not a lawyer.
Right. So what type of lawyer should be consulted on this, specialty-wise?
Well, my lawyer that does estate planning with myself, his name is Tim Lack.
Tim Lack.
He's been on this radio show many, many times, and he's part of my mastermind, as is Blair.
Okay.
He's my own personal lawyer, and he specializes in estate planning. That's exactly what he does.
I see. Okay, and it's L-A-C-K?
L-A-C-K, just like the goalie, but he's not related.
Okay, now the other thing is when your program began, I did not start listening to it from the beginning, so I did not get Mr. Blair's last name.
Manton.
Manton? M-A-N-T-O-N?
T-I-N.
That is correct?
Yes, that's correct, Manton.
Okay, very good.
Yeah,
then.
and the company is Sands and Associates.
Yeah, that I got.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
Sands and Company. Yeah, I did receive that part. Okay, Thank you so much.
And do you also get the book When Life Bites You in the Wallet?
What?
You get a book that Blair co-authored, When Life Bites You in the Wallet.
Oh, that's the title.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a good title for it.
It's a pretty good title. So anyway, give Frida a call down at the office right now at area code 604-737-3512.
Yes, I called her first because I didn't hear the phone number to your radio program show.
Yeah.
So she informed me of that. And thank you so much. It's a very, very good and informative program. And also your speakers.
I appreciate the compliment. You take care.
Take care, too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, I just want to bring to mind the story of Henry Ford. Talk about it all the time. Very, very successful person. Featured in the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. But in that book, Napoleon Hill refers to the mastermind group. And Henry Ford was a very, very successful businessman. He only had 6 years of elementary school. And he was roundly criticized in the Chicago Tribune for being an uneducated fool, even though he was extremely successful. So he sued them. And in court, when he was being cross-examined, they asked him all kinds of ridiculous questions, which he sat there silently. And finally he stood up and he said, "Look, you fools. If you expect me to carry useless knowledge around in my head, based on the questions you're asking me, I refuse to do so." He said, "When I need information, I have 15 buttons on my desk. One button says accountant. So I need to know what my numbers are. I push the button, the accountant comes in. I ask him questions. He gives me the information I need. The other says lawyer, same thing. The other says engineers, same thing, and so on." And he called that his mastermind group. And I have a mastermind group, and Blair is part of that mastermind group. So when I'm looking for an expert on the subject of debt, it's Blair. And when I'm looking for a lawyer on the subject of estate planning, it's Tim Lack. Real estate, same thing. So I have experts in every area that I surround myself with. So I need information, I make a phone call, or I Google it. Google is the ultimate mastermind. There isn't any information that exists out there that you can't access. It's there. And everybody should be mindful of that. Okay? I spend my time, I think the internet is an incredible source of knowledge. And we can get overwhelmed with knowledge. I think the challenge is to learn how to manage that knowledge. That's the key. To be able to organize it and retrieve it and find it as backup. Never has the human race been in such an incredible position right now when it comes to knowledge. It's unreal. So again, that's what we're talking about, and much, much more. I want to finish the show today. We got about 8 minutes or so to go. I want to talk about some case studies. So give us some examples, Blair.
Sure, Fred. So this is helpful for me too, because I think, what we talked about today, it's a lot of abstract concepts. Some people it'll apply to their lives and some people not, but behind every client there's a story, there's a family, there's a situation. So let's go through a couple of those. So one person that I've been working with, she's employed in the healthcare field. She's 36 years old and she's a single parent. She's earning about $3,000 per month through employment and child support. But when she came to see me, she had debts of about $35,000 across 5 different credit cards. She had tried to do all the right things these past few years. She had transferred balances to lower interest rates. She had tried to consolidate loans, but every time she consolidated down to one, she'd have to open up some new credit because of family expenses or whatever, and then suddenly that one would get racked up again. So by the time she saw me, there were 5 of them. They were all pretty well maxed out, about $35,000 in total. Her big challenge, and she was very emotional in our first meeting, was she had started to save some RESPs for her children, and she was also financing a car. So she needed the car to get to work, and she was worried, well, what if I lose this car as part of a proposal or bankruptcy? And the RESPs, that was something she was proud about. She had been going into debt, but she had still been, really scrimping to try to save some money for her kids because she wanted them, to obviously to have the education that they're going to need. So we sat down, we reviewed the entire situation, and what we found out was that a consumer proposal was the right option to go forward here. So let's spend a couple minutes talking about the proposal and how it was able to address her concerns. So, right off the bat, she had $35,000 of debt. Creditors were calling her like crazy. They were threatening her with wage garnishes, and she had been at the same employer for quite some time. So, if she was someone that probably would have been sued on her debts, if it's someone who works in the hospitality industry, they'll move around a lot of different jobs. They're not going to get sued very likely because it's tough to pin somebody down. Someone in the healthcare industry who's been there a long time, probably she would have been sued. So right off the top, as soon as she filed the proposal, she had no issues, no worries that anybody can surprise her because she's legally protected. So nobody can harass her, take her to court, try to seize wages. And the $35,000 of debt plus interest, we reduced it to $15,000 in total with no interest. So right off the top, just under 50% of the total debt, just over a third. So right in that realm of, around a third to 40% of the debt. Her monthly payments they were asking her for $35,000 was well over $1,000, so well over a third of her income. And if, of the $3,000, probably a third's going to shelter. If a third was going to debt, she was supporting a couple of kids on $1,000 a month, which is not possible to do. So right off the top, her $1,000 minimum payments went down to $250 per month. Every dollar goes against the reduced principal. And what was really, really important to her at the end of it was we structured the proposal that she would retain the RESPs because, they were of such a value that she was still able to offer more in the proposal at $250 per month than they would have gotten if they were surrendered. And I was able to explain to her that, just like one of our callers said earlier, the bank doesn't want your car and the bank doesn't want your house.
They don't.
So as long as you're going to pay that car cost each month, the proposal is going to have zero impact on your ability to keep the car. Most of the time when you finance a car, as soon as you drive it off the lot, you're in negative equity and you're going to be that way for years, which was her situation. So I said, well, here's your option. If you're in negative equity, if you don't want the car, you can walk away as part of the proposal and try something new. She said, no, I love the car. I just don't want to lose it. And I said, well, as long as you pay the car, you're not going to lose it. If you don't pay it, you will lose it. And that's going to be the same regardless of a proposal. So as of now, she's got the proposal accepted. She's kept the RESPs. She's paying the car. And her goal is to pay it off sooner than the $250 times 60 months she's trying to pay extra so that she can be done the proposal in 3 or 4 years.
That's good.
Yeah, that was a very inspirational story to me. Yeah.
Life is under control now for her.
She's sleeping again, she's happy, she's spending time with the kids because, it's incredible how much debt stress can pervade your entire life. You'll be hunched over, you're snapping at people, it's really when you don't think there's any way out, it can really consume your life.
Okay, what's another one?
Sure, let's see here. So another one that we tend to deal with a lot is relationship breakdown. So we talked a lot about, you get sick or you lose your job, those are 2 big ones. But a third one is, you've been with somebody for a long time, it doesn't work, and then suddenly you've got the double whammy of having to reestablish yourself. As someone new, so you got to furnish a new apartment or whatever. But then often there's been some mutual misleading of both parties in the relationship. Usually if a relationship's deteriorating, they stop talking about money pretty early into that. So probably you're going to have more debt than you anticipated. Either you've rung it up on your own cards, or as I mentioned earlier, if you're together, husbands and wife debts, husbands is husbands, wife is wife, and that's it. But if you split up, suddenly your spouse can make a claim against you for half of the debt that was incurred in the relationship. So the individual that I was dealing with, he was 44 years old, his long-term relationship ended, and he had a bunch of upfront costs to reestablish himself, and he also had some debts that he owed to his ex-spouse for debts they had incurred together. So his situation wasn't as extreme as the one I just mentioned to you. It was $27,000 of debt, which obviously for someone who's not in my world, that sounds extreme. Let's not, put too fine a point around it. $27,000 of credit card debt is pretty bad.
Yeah.
Maybe not when you compare it to $100,000, but still pretty bad. And it was across 7 different credit cards. He was getting collection calls morning, noon, and night. They were calling his employer, berating him. He was very hunched over when he came in to see me, thinking, well, I guess I just have to endure this. He was only making $2,000 a month, so realistically he couldn't afford to make very much, make any headway on these debts at all. You know, even the minimum payments were too much for him, and the minimum payments wouldn't have had him out of debt this century, you know. So what we were able to do is we explained to him, you know, here's a bankruptcy, and you could be done a bankruptcy in 9 months, and you could pay $1,800. He didn't want to do that. He said, you know what, I think I can pay off a proposal. I think I can adjust my budget. So instead of taking a bankruptcy option, he filed a consumer proposal where he's going to pay back about 45% of the debt. So his debt went from $27,000 down to $12,000. So he's going to make monthly payments of $330 per month over 36 months. So he wants to pay it off in 3 years from 27 plus interest down to 12 with no interest.
And any fee that you would charge for that is part of the payment?
Is part of the payment, yeah. So when we filed the proposal, it was for $330 times 36 months. The day we signed, he paid me $330. We sent the proposal out for voting. It came back approved, which 95 out of 100 do, and then he just continued paying thereafter. The only other thing he had to do was meet with me for 2 counseling sessions, which you'll get a lot more out of it than it's a cost. Trust me, that's a benefit.
So for the last 2 hours, we have talked, you and me, and some of our listeners, about debt management, which is part of the financial planning process. Everybody needs a written financial plan. Give me a call or call Frida. We'll provide one pro bono. See you at same time, same station next week. Bye for now.
If you'd like Fred to review your portfolio, call his office right now at 604-737-3512. That's 604-737-3512.